Chapter 54. Murong Ditian's reputation in the Beichen manor was unparalleled, and he was publicly acknowledged as the #1 prodigy. At such a young age, his cultivation had already reached the 7th transformation of qi refinement. At the same time, he had also cultivated many powerful sword techniques. In all aspects, he could be said to be invincible. Different from Murong Ming, whose talent was slightly inferior, Murong Ditian had received the full nurturing of the Murong family. It should be known that if a super family used all their resources to nurture a person, even a person with ordinary talent could become a prodigy. Not to mention that Murong Ditian was a 6th-rank prodigy with extraordinary talent. Although he didn't have any innate abilities, his talent, temperament, and comprehension far surpassed ordinary prodigies. Even Yi Guqin's archenemy, Xia Yubing, was only a 5th-rank prodigy. If she didn't receive the inheritance of the North River Sword King, she wouldn't even have the qualifications to be on par with Yi Guqin. From this, it could be seen how extraordinary Murong Ditian was. And such a youth was the perfect Dao companion in the eyes of all the females. However, facing Murong Ditian's arrival, Sidu Hongxue frowned slightly and said, "What are you doing here?" Her tone was calm, and even had a trace of indifference. The current Sidu Hongxue didn't have the attitude of a little girl anymore. She appeared to be indifferent, like a goddess from the 9 heavens. "I'm just here to see my fiancé." Facing the indifferent Sidu Hongxue, Murong Ditian didn't mind at all, and the corner of his mouth still carried a faint smile. "You're disturbing my sword practice." Sidu Hongxue turned her head away. Although Murong Ditian could be said to be perfect in all aspects, Sidu Hongxue was also a dragon among men. Naturally, she wouldn't be infatuated with Murong Ditian like other girls. Furthermore, she didn't have any feelings for Murong Ditian. It was just a marriage between 2 aristocratic families. No matter how aloof Sidu Hongxue was, she was still a member of the Situ family. She couldn't go against the will of the entire family. Furthermore, since Sidu Hongxue was born, she hadn't liked any guy. Therefore, to her, feelings were no longer important. Only the sword was where her heart was. "If you want to train in the sword, I can accompany you." Murong Ditian continued to smile. "Aren't you annoying?" Big Sister Hongxue already said that she wants to practice the sword by herself, Sidu Ling said with a frown. She was extremely disgusted with Murong Ming, and she didn't have any good impression of Murong Ditian as well. Although Murong Ditian's attitude was always warm and he always had a faint smile on his face, in the depths of his eyes, there seemed to always be a kind of indifference. In the younger generation of the Beichen manor, if I say that I am #2 in the way of the sword, who would dare to say that they are #1? Murong Ditian said casually. His words were very light, but they were so loud that even the deaf could hear them. And with Murong Ditian's tone, it was obvious that he wasn't being arrogant when he said those words. Instead, it was because he had absolute confidence in himself. Situ Hongxue suddenly laughed. Her smile was as beautiful as 100 flowers blooming. Even if it was Murong Ditian, his mind was also taken away by this smile, and he was stunned for an instant. However, it only lasted for an instant before it recovered. "Hongxue, what are you laughing at?" Murong Ditian suppressed his admiration for Situ Hongxue's beautiful smile and asked. "I'm laughing at the fact that a frog in a well can't talk about the sea, and a summer insect can't talk about the ice. You will know after looking at this sword-seeking steel." Situ Hongxue shook her head. Murong Ditian walked forward and stared at the sword-seeking steel. He first casually glanced at it, then faintly frowned. He was naturally able to recognize the trajectory of Situ Hongxue's sword. However, the sword mark of the other person caused Murong Ditian to frown. "Someone else came here, and it's a man?" Murong Ditian's expression changed for the first time. He was no longer smiling, but had become somewhat cold and solemn. "Oh, do you mind?" Sidu Hongxue asked. "There is indeed some skill. However, there isn't a trace of true qi. Perhaps, it's just a piece of trash who only knows a little about sword arts." Murong Ditian's expression was incomparably indifferent. He had long viewed Situ Hongxue as his exclusive property and wouldn't allow anyone to touch her, even if it was just getting close to her. In Murong Ditian's eyes, he didn't need Situ Hongxue to practice his sword arts. Sidu Hongxue only needed to be a canary in a cage for him to enjoy and play with. You are jealous. Jealous of this person's comprehension towards the way of the sword, Sidu Hongshue's words were filled with sarcasm. What kind of sword art is this? Watch as I break it with brute force. The aura around Murong Ditian's body suddenly exploded, and the true qi of the seventh transformation of qi refinement was emitted without restraint. At the same time, the sword that was wrapped in bandages on his back suddenly leaped up and landed in Murong Ditian's hand. Mysterious heaven sword art, break. Murong Ditian waved his sword. That long sword was still wrapped in bandages, but an incomparably valiant sword qi was released. Majestic and fearful, the sword qi was like the judgment of the heavens as it landed on the sword-testing stone. Previously, Murong Ming had also executed the mysterious heaven sword art, but compared to Murong Ditian, the sword art that Murong Ming executed was like a child playing house. An incomparably thick and deep sword mark slashed across the entire sword-testing stone from top to bottom. Almost all of the sword marks on the sword-testing stone were erased by this sword mark. It had to be known that this was an incomparably hard basalt rock. To be able to leave such a sword mark on basalt rock, it could be seen how powerful Murong Ditian's sword was. What are you doing? Sidu Hongshue's expression suddenly changed. She still wanted to comprehend the concept of the sword on the sword-testing stone, but in the end, her sword was destroyed by Murong Ditian. You only need to comprehend my concept of the sword. Murong Ditian's words were domineering and incomprehensible. You are unreasonable. Situ Hongshue's delicate face was slightly pale, and her brows were tightly knitted. You will eventually understand me. After we pass the sword-seeking stone, it will be our wedding day. Have a good rest. Murong Ditian flicked his sleeves and left. If I encounter the person who left a sword mark on the sword-testing stone, no matter who you are, you will die. Murong Ditian coldly said in his heart. Big Sister Hongxue, that Murong Ditian is really too much. You won't be happy if you marry him. Situ Ling gritted her teeth and said angrily. Sigh. The fate of the clan is difficult. Father secretly told me that my Situ clan seems to be coveted by many people. Only by forming a marriage alliance with the Murong clan can we obtain a chance of survival. Situ Hongxue closed her beautiful eyes, and there was a painful expression between her brows, causing others to feel pity for her. It was very obvious that the rise and fall of a clan needed to be shouldered by a woman. This burden was a bit too heavy. However, Situ Hongxue didn't escape, and she shouldered it all by herself. It's a pity that the sword-testing stone has been destroyed, and the concept is gone. Situ Hongxue felt that it was a pity, and at the same time, she felt guilty. She knew that the person who left the sword mark had the intention to give her pointers, but now, it was destroyed by Murong Ditian. In the end, Situ Hongxue sighed. She raised her jade hand and took out a hairpin from her hair. It was as gentle as jade, and it even had the fragrance of Situ Hongshue's hair. Big Sister Hongxue? Situ Ling opened her eyes wide, and was incomparably shocked. Situ Hongxue actually left her personal accessory behind. This action was very unusual. Even Murong Ditian hadn't received any of Situ Hongshue's personal accessories before. Furthermore, that hairpin wasn't just an accessory. It seems that although Big Sister Hongxue didn't meet that person, a mark has already been left in her heart. Situ Ling sighed, and she didn't know if this was good or bad. Soon after, Situ Hongxue and Situ Ling both left. Another day passed, and Yi Guchen came to this place again. Chapter 55. Yi Guchen was curious. He wanted to see if the female sword cultivator would comprehend anything else. But when he saw the vertical sword mark on the sword test rock, his expression changed slightly. What a domineering sword path. Yi Guchen sighed inwardly. This sword move was extremely ferocious and domineering. It was definitely not an ordinary sword art. It was definitely a spirit-level sword art, and its grade was probably not low even among the spirit-level sword arts. Yi Guchen thought to himself, the person who attacked with the sword has superb swordsmanship and a solid foundation. However, his sword moves are too sharp. Obviously, he is from the younger generation. However, looking at this sword move, It is obvious that he is venting his anger by destroying all my sword moves. Suddenly, he found something under the sword test rock. He picked it up and saw that it was a woman's hairpin. The hairpin was like jade and had a lingering fragrance that filled his nose. Looks like it was left by the female sword cultivator, Yi Guchen thought. He did not want to leave it because he was just following fate and did not want to get involved. But in the next moment, Yi Guchen was surprised. He infused a wisp of profound qi into the hairpin. The hairpin that looked like it was carved from jade suddenly released a circle of light. This circle of white light was like a halo behind the head of a Buddha. It enveloped Yi Guchen's body. It's a supreme-grade defensive spiritual weapon? Yi Guchen was dumbfounded. A defensive spiritual weapon was more precious than an offensive spiritual weapon. Moreover, it was a supreme-grade defensive spiritual weapon. The only supreme-grade defensive spiritual weapon that Yi Guchen had seen was the red-haired ghost's shield. After some hesitation, Yi Guchen accepted it. He knew that this was the female sword cultivator's way of repaying him. Because of Yi Guchen's advice, she had benefited greatly. In terms of value, it was indeed not lower than this defensive spiritual weapon. Looks like the female sword cultivator's background is not ordinary. Yi Guchen thought inwardly. The sword test rock had been destroyed. There was no point in leaving a sword mark. Yi Guchen shook his head slightly and left. There was nothing to be regretful about. He had just done it casually. After leaving the sword testing rock, Yi Guchen returned to his inn. A few days later, when the light of the celestial the arch sword shone through the window and onto the ground, Yi Guchen, who was sitting cross-legged on his bed, suddenly sensed something. He opened his eyes, opened the window, and looked into the distance. The desolation city wasn't far from the great desolation forest. Yi Guchen seemed to be able to see an unparalleled pressure of the sword realm sweeping out from a towering mountain in the depths of the great desolation forest. That sword intent seemed to disregard even the will of the heavens and earth as it looked down upon the universe and shook the heavens. An absolute master of the way of the sword. Yi Guchen frowned. He could feel the powerful sword will. After coming to this world, there were not many people that Yi Guchen recognized as powerful in the way of the sword. This was the second one. The first was naturally the blood-listening tower's master who had never shown himself, and only a strand of the sword insight contained within the sound of his flute. At this moment, the entire desolation city was in an uproar because the sword-seeking steel in the great desolation forest had finally opened again. Within the city, countless people swarmed out and headed towards the great desolation forest. It could be said that as long as one could obtain a seat at the sword-seeking steel, one's name would definitely spread far and wide in the Beichen mansion, not to mention the opportunity to obtain many opportunities. Yi Guchen did not delay either. He put on his bamboo hat and headed straight for the Great Desolation Forest. The Great Desolation Forest was about the same size as the Cloud Valley mountain range, but it was more desolate and ancient. There was no lack of third and fourth rank demonic beasts in the depths of the forest. Some of the demonic beasts were even feared by divine soul realm experts. Within the forest, the vegetation was dense and the huge trees towered into the sky. Sunlight could only pass through a few gaps, casting incomplete spots on the ground, causing the dark forest to appear even more deathly silent and cold. With the opening of the sword-seeking steel, the originally deathly silent Great Desolation Forest suddenly became noisy. Many geniuses entered the forest, wanting to reach the mountain peak where the sword-seeking steel was. From time to time, there would be miserable cries echoing from various parts of the forest. Those were the geniuses who encountered powerful demonic beasts and lost their lives in the mouths of demonic beasts. Of course, there were also some true geniuses who were not afraid of these demonic beasts. They walked through the Great Desolation Forest as if they were taking a stroll in the park. Looks like I will definitely have a seat at the sword-seeking steel this time. A young man wearing a black and white robe casually killed a second-rank demonic beast with a proud smile on his face. He was the limitless sword sex Lu Tiani. I will obtain first place at the sword-seeking steel. Situ Hongxue, I will let you know that only I am worthy of you. Murong Ditian walked casually within the forest, and he did not even draw his sword. As he flipped his palm, countless sword chi soared into the sky and tore apart the surrounding demonic beasts, causing blood to fill the sky. I wonder if anyone will be able to obtain the sword-seeking steel's approval this time. In another place, Chu Qingqi was dressed in green. Green sword chi surged around his body, making it difficult for demonic beasts to get close to him. In the central region of the Great Desolation Forest, a scarlet demonic python was entrenched beside a small tree. There were bright red fruits on the tree trunk. A sword light suddenly shot towards the scarlet demonic python. The demonic python hissed and spat out a dense scarlet poisonous fog. However, that sword light directly tore apart the poisonous fog and chopped off the demonic python's head. Even the demonic python did not have time to react to such a swift sword light. A black-robed figure landed beside the small tree. It was Yiguchen. Snake saliva fruit, a rare supreme great spirit medicine. Yiguchen lifted his hand and plucked a few snake saliva fruits. His current cultivation was already at the 9th level of the essence realm. He was not far from the chi refining realm. However, he would only enter the chi refining realm after he broke through to the perfect physical body. Therefore, Yiguchen also needed to gather and prepare some spirit medicine to assist him in cultivating the perfect physical body. Although there were many dangers in the Great Desolation Forest, it was also a land of treasures. There was no lack of rare and exotic fruits, which were very useful for cultivation. At the same time, Yiguchen continued to hone his swordsmanship, especially the piercing moon swordsmanship. When Yiguchen performed it, he felt a sense of carefreeness. He felt that this swordsmanship could continue to be improved. If he had an epiphany, it was possible for him to practice it to the perfection of martial arts. After that, Yiguchen continued to hone his swordsmanship and collect all kinds of rare treasures. As for the sword-seeking steel, he was not in a hurry. Not everyone could sit on those seats. After a day, a piece of news suddenly spread in the Great Desolation Forest. In a deep valley, someone had found an extremely rare material, the meteorite iron. As soon as the news came out, everyone was shocked. The meteorite iron was a precious material for forging magic weapons with spiritual inscriptions. Its characteristic was that it could bear the power of many spiritual inscriptions. It should be known that the power of a magic weapon with spiritual inscriptions mainly came from the spiritual inscriptions. The more spiritual inscriptions there were, the stronger the power of the magic weapon with spiritual inscriptions would be. However, the more spiritual inscriptions there were, the more power it would bring. If an ordinary material exceeded the limit it could bear, it would collapse. In other words, the casting material could not bear the power of more spiritual inscriptions. However, the meteorite iron was special in that it could bear the power of spiritual inscriptions very well. If a magic weapon with spiritual inscriptions could only bear one spiritual inscription, then after adding a little meteorite iron, it could bear 2 or more spiritual inscriptions. This showed how precious it was. Let's go and have a look. Yiguchen was collecting materials to forge a soft sword, and obviously he could not miss the meteorite iron. Chapter 56. In a valley in the Great Wild Forest, there were many people. Many cultivators had rushed over after hearing the news. They all wanted to find the rare meteorite iron in the deep valley. Outside the valley, Yiguchen landed on the crown of an ancient tree and looked at the valley not far away. Although the news had spread, it was obviously not so easy to find it. Everyone in the valley, leave within 10 breaths. A loud shout spread throughout the valley. A group of people came to the entrance of the valley. The leader was dressed in a black and white robe with a sun and moon pattern embroidered on his chest. It was Lu Tianying of the Limitless Sword sect. The people behind him were also dressed in the robes of the Limitless Sword sect. Although their auras were not as strong as his, they were comparable to the heaven's prides of a prefecture. Although the meteorite iron is extremely precious, there should be no shortage of this treasure in the Limitless Sword sect. What is this Lu Tianying trying to do? Yiguchen frowned slightly, sensing that things were not simple. After Lu Tianying spoke, some cultivators also secretly cursed and left. Although they were extremely unwilling, the Limitless Sword sect was too powerful and there was no way to resist. After the miscellaneous people were expelled, Lu Tianying and the others entered the valley. Yi Guchen's expression changed. He used the willow cat can win movement technique and quietly sneaked in. He did not make a move. Instead, he waited for Lu Tianying and the others. "Senior brother Lu, I found it." A voice sounded. It was a disciple of the Limitless Sword sect. He found a hidden cracked rock under the cover of grass and trees. There were some silver-like metal minerals scattered around. It was the meteorite iron. "Ha, I really found it." Lu Tianying's eyes were filled with joy. Yi Guchen, who was in the dark, watched attentively. At this moment, a figure flashed in the air and directly rushed to the cracked rock. With a wave of his sleeve, he took the meteorite iron into his bag. "It's him." Yi Guchen narrowed his eyes. A figure appeared. He was dressed in a golden robe and had a round figure with a sword at his waist. It was the little fatty of unknown origin from the auction. "It's you again." Lu Tianying glared. "Thank you." The little fatty smiled cheekily as he looked at Lu Tianying. He was not in a hurry to run because he knew that Lu Tianying could not catch up with his speed. "So you think you can leave?" The anger on Lu Tianying's face suddenly disappeared and was replaced by a sneer. Little fatty was stunned. He felt that the development of the situation was somewhat beyond his expectations. "Let's go." With a thought, little fatty didn't stay any longer. Golden light flickered beneath his feet as he flashed away. At this moment, the ground suddenly lit up. It was a formation rune that flowed on the ground like ripples. A powerful sealing force soared into the sky, forming a dense chain of sealing chains that locked the little fatty within. "It's a little overkill to use a low-class human-level sealing formation on you." An old voice sounded. An old man with white hair and beard walked out from the dense forest. It was Master Gu, who had been angered by the little fatty. Beside him was the Divine Soul Realm expert. Little fatty's face instantly turned ugly. "It's a low-class human-level formation." Yi Guchen, who was hiding in the dark, could not help but be shocked. The little Ashura sword formation he had was also a low-class human-level formation, but its function was different from this formation. This formation focused on sealing, which was obviously to restrain the little fatty's strange speed. As for the so-called meteorite iron, it was obviously a trap set up by Lu Tianying and Master Gu to capture the little fatty. "Are you guys bent on messing with yours truly?" Little fatty placed his hands behind his back with an unfathomable look on his face. However, with his chubby face, which even looked a little rich, it was out of place no matter how one looked at it. Just deliberately mystifying." Lu Tianying sneered. "We'll capture you today and wash away the shame of that day." The Divine Soul Realm expert beside Master Gu also stared coldly at the little fatty. As a Divine Soul Realm expert, it was the first time he had been so humiliated. "Don't force me to draw my sword, or you'll regret it," the little fatty said with a serious face. "Oh, sword? What sword?" Lu Tianying's face was full of disdain. The Limitless Sword sect was a sword sect, and Lu Tianying boasted that the Limitless Sword sect was the #1 sword sect in the Saint Origin dynasty. He had seen all kinds of famous swords and sword techniques, so he was naturally disdainful of the little fatty. "Sai, you really don't understand. My sword is called my truth. It's a sword that pursues the great Tao and seeks the true self." The little fatty slowly pressed his hand on the sword hilt at his waist. "My truth sword?" Lu Tianying murmured. "That's right, you're really cheap," the little fatty said with compassion. Lu Tianying was stunned for a moment, and his face immediately flushed red. "Are you playing with me?" Lu Tianying was furious. He did not say anything else and directly attacked. His true chi turned into sword chi and slashed at the little fatty. On the other side, the Divine Soul Realm expert also attacked. His true chi condensed, and his hand pressed down on the little fatty. "Unsheath my truth. With a sword in hand, I'm invincible," the little fatty howled. Golden light flashed under his feet, and he directly flashed to the other side. He then pulled out his sword and slashed at the sealing formation on the ground. It did not look like he was using a sword, but more like a farmer chopping firewood. However, the sealing formation was obviously not something that could be broken in a short time. Lu Tianying and the Divine Soul Realm expert had already attacked again. The little fatty relied on his mysterious body movement to hold on while trying his best to break the formation. Yiguchen, who was hiding in the dark, saw this and shook his head. Although he was very interested in the little fatty's mysterious silver heavy water, it was obviously very difficult to get it under the current circumstances. Boom! Lu Tianning once again pointed his sword finger at the little fatty. Luo Tian protection. Little fatty let out a cry, and his entire body surged with light. Vaguely, an illusory figure formed around him. It was like the guardian Vajra of Buddhism, and it enveloped little fatty's body. Rumble! The sword finger fell on the guardian Vajra's illusory figure, but only a rumbling sound erupted, and it did not break through its defense. Damn it, it was originally mine. Just give it back to me. Lu Tianning's expression became even more gloomy when he saw the little fatty display Luo Tian protection. The Luo Tian protection was originally his, but the little fatty snatched it away. Now that he saw the little fatty display it, Lu Tianning's heart itched with hatred. However, although the little fatty had Luo Tian protection, there was another divine soul realm expert besides Lu Tianning. 9 Extreme Golden Palm. The divine soul realm expert finally decided not to delay any longer. Extremely vigorous genuine qi surged out of his body and gathered in his palm. The dark golden palm of qi almost covered the entire ceiling array formation as it grabbed at little fatty. Rumble! Even with the Luo Tian protection, the little fatty was directly knocked over, and the guardian Vajra's illusory figure on the surface of his body disappeared. The attack of a divine soul realm expert was so powerful. The little fatty's face was a little ugly, and he muttered to himself, "It wasn't easy for me to sneak out. Do I have to go back again?" No, just when the little fatty was in a critical situation, he seemed to sense an obscure sword essence. "Hey brother, help me." A divine thought was quietly transmitted to Yiguchen's mind in the dark. Chapter 57. Yiguchen raised his eyebrows. Divine sense transmission was a skill that only experts above the divine soul realm could use. The little fatty obviously hadn't reached the divine soul realm, but he had such a skill. In Yiguchen's eyes, the seemingly unreliable little fatty became somewhat mysterious. "Why should I save you?" Yiguchen thought. "I can sense a sword concept from your body. You're a sword cultivator, right? As the saying goes, when you see injustice on the road, you should draw your sword to help. Isn't this what a righteous swordsman should do?" The little fatty hurriedly said as he dodged in a sorry state. Yiguchen turned around and was about to leave. "Hey brother, don't be like this. What do you want?" The little fatty shouted anxiously. "The mysterious silver heavy water, the protection of all heaven, a portion of the meteorite iron, and that mysterious movement skill of yours," Yiguchen said to himself. "What? Are you trying to skin this young master?" Little fatty shrieked in his spiritual sense. Yiguchen also felt that he might have gone too far, but on second thought, if he wanted to save the little fatty, he would have to bear the anger of Lu Tianying and Master Gu. Obviously, the price he had to pay was not small. "I can't pass on my movement skill to you, but I can give you the rest," the little fatty said, clenching his teeth. The mysterious and unpredictable secret technique was one of his trump cards. Moreover, he wouldn't divulge it to anyone else. So, he would rather die than give it to Yiguchen. Although the mysterious silver heavy water and the meteorite iron were precious, they were nothing compared to his life. As for the protection of all heaven, he had already practiced it, so he didn't mind giving it to Yiguchen. Okay. Yiguchen nodded slightly. Although he didn't want to cause too much trouble for Lu Tianying, with the relationship between Lu Tianying and Murong Ming, it was hard to guarantee that there wouldn't be any friction in the future. In that case, it was better to get some benefits for himself now. In order to forge a flexible sword and practice the hard-soft sword essence as soon as possible, Yiguchen was willing to pay a price. "Deal. Brother, all you need to do is break the weak point of the ceiling formation. Then, we'll attack together." Fatty sent a secret vocal transmission to Chen Feng. Yiguchen nodded slightly. His origin ring flashed, and tribulation dust quietly entered his hand. The profound qi in his body was brewing. Jie Chen's vessel meridians were lit up one by one. At the same time, the sharp edge spirit tattoo was quietly accumulating power. Now, little Fatty suddenly let out a loud roar. He raised his true sword and stabbed it towards a weak corner of the ceiling array formation. Yiguchen made his move as well. 42 vessel meridians of the Calamity Dust sword lit up. At the same time, the broken edge spirit mark was activated. The extremely sharp sword light almost tore through the air. A waning moon swept out. The ultimate move of the piercing moon sword technique, Moonfall. After Yiguchen had cultivated the moon-piercing sword technique to the perfect melder realm, the power of his sword technique had increased exponentially. Naturally, the power of his ultimate move had increased as well. At this moment, the sword slashed out like a crescent moon in the sky. In addition to the enhancement of the broken edge spiritual tattoo, the sharpness of the sword light was unparalleled. A violent whistling sound erupted in the air, as if the air was being split open. Boom! Yiguchen's Calamity Dust sword and Little Fatty's true sword both pointed at the weak spot of the array formation at the same time. The originally tight array formation instantly cracked. Then, to the surprise of Lu Tianying and the others, it suddenly exploded into light spots that filled the sky. Let's go! Little Fatty still had some conscience. He grabbed Yiguchen's hand. Golden light flashed under their feet, and the two of them instantly flashed hundreds of feet away. Lu Tianying and the others were stunned for a moment. It seemed that they had not yet reacted because all of this happened too suddenly and too quickly. There was no time for them to react at all. But then, Lu Tianying and Master Gu both let out angry roars. They racked their brains and even took out a precious material like the meteorite iron, just to use it as bait to lure Little Fatty into the trap. Originally, things had indeed developed according to their plan. However, halfway through, a man in a bamboo hat had appeared. That kid actually has an accomplice. Lu Tianying instinctively regarded Yiguchen as Little Fatty's accomplice. Damn it, we even lost this old man's meteorite iron. Master Gu wanted to cry but had no tears. Didn't I also lose the ceiling array? Lu Tianying's face was also ugly, and he was furious. Even in the Limitless Sword sect, this kind of ceiling array was not so easy to obtain. Lu Tianying had also completed many sect missions to be able to receive the reward of the ceiling array. Just as Lu Tianying, Master Gu, and the others were pounding their chests in anger, Yiguchen and Little Fatty had already found a safe and remote cave. Little Fatty was panting heavily, and he felt a lingering fear. Yiguchen was fine. He was wearing a bamboo hat, so Lu Tianying and the others probably did not see through him. Brother, thank you very much. Little Fatty chuckled. After experiencing a life-and-death situation just now, he was now acting as if nothing had happened. Yiguchen even suspected that with Little Fatty's temperament, how could he survive alone until now? However, although Little Fatty had many secrets, Yiguchen did not intend to ask. It had nothing to do with him. It's no problem. We're just taking what we need. Yiguchen's nature was somewhat indifferent. He did not care about anything other than the sword Dao. Little Fatty did not mind and handed over the mysterious silver heavy water, meteorite iron, and the protection of Luo Tian scroll. After Yiguchen took it, he nodded slightly. Little Fatty gave him 5 drops of mysterious silver heavy water, which was enough as an auxiliary material to refine the soft sword. There was also a fist-sized piece of meteorite iron. As for the protection of Luo Tian, Yiguchen believed that as long as he learned this defensive martial art, his strength would skyrocket again. Ordinary Qi refinement realm warriors would no longer be a threat to him. I'll be in seclusion here to cultivate the protection of Luo Tian. What about you? Yiguchen asked. Of course I'll continue to go out and have fun. Little Fatty said heartlessly. I might not be able to save you next time. Yiguchen said. If they dare to provoke me again, I'll risk being scolded and ask Master to destroy that Limitless Sword sect. Little Fatty said indifferently. Yiguchen's eyes dimmed. He did not say anything. He did not intend to ask Little Fatty. Little Fatty left. Yiguchen prepared to cultivate the protection of Luo Tian. One day later, in the cave, Yiguchen's eyes were clear. The profound qi in his body surged. Mist surrounded his body, faintly condensing into the shadow of a guardian Vajra. However, this shadow was even more illusory than Little Fatty's. It was almost in the form of mist. Even so, it still had a certain degree of defensive power. After all, Little Fatty's protection of Luotian had blocked a martial art from a divine soul realm warrior. At present, Yiguchen's protection of Luotian could at least block the attack of an ordinary Qi refinement realm warrior. Of course, this was also because Yiguchen had only cultivated the protection of Luotian for a short time. When he was proficient in it and broke through to the Qi refinement realm, he could begin to exert the effect of the protection of Luotian. In this way, I have one more layer of protection. Yiguchen smiled faintly. He dispersed the shadow and walked out of the cave. He continued to rush into the great wild forest. At the same time, he used many demonic beasts to practice his swordsmanship. His piercing moonsword art had reached the top of perfection. At the same time, his boundless heaven sword art was close to the small completion. Faintly, Yiguchen felt that he only needed an opportunity to comprehend the essence of these two sword arts. And that opportunity was naturally the sword-seeking steel. Chapter 58. Finally, one day later, Yiguchen approached the Sky Sword Peak. Before reaching the area of the Sky Sword Peak, Yiguchen felt an extremely strong sword pressure from dozens of miles away. It was mighty and overwhelming. Some of the weaker cultivators would probably feel uncomfortable here. Within dozens of miles of the Sky Sword Peak, there were no demonic beasts. Because the sword chi pressure was too strong, no demonic beast could stay here for a long time. Yiguchen looked around. Vaguely, there were sparse figures flying towards the Sky Sword Peak. Those who could reach here were all unique geniuses. They could not be underestimated. Let's go. Yiguchen did not hesitate at all. Instead, there was a hint of excitement in his eyes. He could faintly sense an otherworldly sword intent from this sword pressure, and it was of great reference and inspiration to him. As time went by, Yiguchen got closer to the Sky Sword Peak. 30 miles, 20 miles, 10 miles. Finally, the Sky Sword Peak was right in front of him. Yiguchen looked over and saw the Sky Sword Peak towering into the clouds. It was hundreds of feet high, like a stone sword. On the peak, he could vaguely see a stone tablet covered with countless sword scars. It stood tall with a sense of vicissitudes. The pressure of the sword chi here could not be underestimated. The mighty sword chi was like an invisible wave, surging in all directions. Moreover, the sword chi pressure would strengthen or weaken according to one's cultivation. Yiguchen was only in the essence realm, so the sword essence pressure was still bearable for him. Most importantly, the sword essence pressure not only suppressed the physical body, but also had a slight impact on the soul. If a sword cultivator had a deep understanding of the sword principle, he would be able to bear the pressure better. Therefore, the sword-seeking steel was a great opportunity for a sword cultivator. Yiguchen began to climb the Sky Sword Peak. It was hundreds of feet high. Normally, it would not be difficult for a warrior to climb the Sky Sword Peak. However, under the pressure of the powerful sword essence, it was not that simple. Even Yiguchen's forehead was covered in sweat, let alone the others. However, Yiguchen seemed to have felt some kind of mystery from the sword essence pressure. The closer he got to the peak, the more intense the mysterious feeling became. Haha, I'll definitely have a spot on the sword-seeking steel. Suddenly, a figure broke through the air. Genuine chi burst out from his body as he flew towards the peak. It's him? Yiguchen looked over. That person was Lu Tianying of the Wuji sword sect. Lu Tianying was so focused on climbing that he didn't notice Yiguchen in the corner. At the same time, a faint laughter was heard from the other side. A young man dressed in green stood with his hands behind his back. Green sword chi flowed around his body. He seemed to still have some strength left and was quite calm. This person was naturally Chu Qingqi of the sword sect's Forest of Towers. Humph, what sword essence? It's just Esoso. Zhao Fengyang of the sealed Saber Monarch Hall appeared with a disdainful look. The appearance of the god-favored sons caused a wave of exclamations. They were the ones who had the strength to compete for the 5 spots on the sword-seeking steel. You're a saber cultivator. What's the point of coming to the sword seeking steel? Chu Qingqi stared at Zhao Fengyang. Wouldn't it be great if I, a saber cultivator, occupy a spot on the sword seeking steel? Zhao Fengyang laughed with disdain. Then let's wait and see. Chu Qingqi's eyes darkened and he did not say anything else. Humph, I'll give you a big surprise today, Zhao Fengyang said coldly in his heart. The geniuses of the major forces joined hands and soon, they were halfway up the mountain. Yi Guchen was still not in a hurry. He followed his own pace and at the same time, he was carefully comprehending the mystery contained in the pressure of the sword qi. I'll definitely take a spot on the sword seeking steel. Suddenly, a cold and arrogant voice sounded. Although the voice was not loud, it seemed to resound in everyone's ears. Everyone looked over and saw two figures approaching. Yi Guchen also looked over. He was familiar with one of the figures. It was Murong Ming. The other man walking in front had a stalwart figure. He walked with a majestic gait and carried a long sword wrapped in bandages on his back. His gaze was cold and arrogant as he looked around. Almost no one dared to look him in the eye. Murong Ditian of the Murong family. He's really here? Some warriors whispered. He's Murong Ditian? Yi Guchen thought to himself. At the same time, his eyes focused on the long sword on Murong Ditian's back. He could feel that the long sword was extraordinary. He was an opponent. Yi Guchen thought to himself. No wonder he was the #1 son of heaven in Beichen Mansion. He was indeed imposing. Right when everyone was still in shock, another two beautiful figures flashed over like ripples. Yi Guchen was also familiar with one of them. It was Situ Ling. As for the other person, even Yi Guchen, who had a calm temperament, was stunned when he saw her. That lady was wearing a snow-colored silk dress. She was pure and had a delicate figure. She was like a cloud that covered the moon. She was dazzling and looked like snow that was blown by the wind. The most stunning thing was her flawless face. It was like a painting, causing people to linger. It's Situ Hongxue. She's indeed one of the beauties of the Saint Origin dynasty. Many warriors exclaimed in surprise. Their eyes were filled with infatuation. Who wouldn't want to take such a beauty into their arms? But when they saw Murong Ditian, who was not far away, their hearts turned cold. Although Situ Hongxue was a beauty, she was already taken. These people didn't have the courage to snatch her from Murong Ditian. Hongxue, do you need me to reserve a seat for you? Murong Ditian asked gently when he saw Situ Hongxue. The surrounding warriors were speechless. They didn't even have the qualifications to fight for a seat. Murong Ditian actually had the qualifications to say such words. They couldn't help but sigh at the difference in status. No need. I will fight for it myself. Situ Hongxue wasn't a flower vase that relied on others. She also had her own pride. She directly refused and started to ascend the heavenly sword peak. Murong Ditian smiled faintly and followed closely behind. Seems like it's not that easy to obtain a seat. Yi Guchen thought to himself. He didn't ascend to the front. Firstly, it was too conspicuous. Secondly, it was because he still needed to carefully comprehend the profoundness of the sword pressure. Although the sword qi that was released from the sword seek steel gave people extreme pressure, it also gave people a kind of comprehension. The deeper one's understanding of the sword Dao, the stronger one's comprehension would be. The person who left behind this sword seek steel must be a peerless expert in the sword Dao. This sword pressure is terrifying. If I could gather the sword intent of heaven and earth into one, I would have no regrets if I could personally witness it being executed. Yi Guchen couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Within this sword intent, there was a trace of an expert's loneliness. It was very similar to the sword devil in his previous life. After entering this kind of comprehension, even Yi Guchen didn't notice that the sword pressure was getting weaker and weaker. Yi Guchen's figure was also getting faster and faster. His eyes were also getting brighter and brighter. Yi Guchen already had some comprehension. Finally, Yi Guchen, who gradually stood out, attracted some people's attention. Chapter 59. Hey, who's that? How can he be so fast? Yeah, we can't even move an inch in the sky sword peak. We're practically moving, but he's the only one who's moving as if he's flying? Some of the sword cultivators were stunned when they saw Yi Guqin's swift figure. Then they were shocked. Yi Guqin was immersed in a state of comprehension. Although his body was like a swimming dragon, his consciousness was immersed in comprehending the pressure of the sword qi. He naturally didn't know how extraordinary his current performance was. Soon, Yi Guqin gradually caught up with the top few geniuses. Who's that? Zhao Fengyang was the first to notice Yi Guqin. When he looked over, his face instantly darkened. Although Yi Guqin was wearing a bamboo hat, Zhao Fengyang recognized him. He was the sword cultivator who had beaten up the disciples of the saber-conferred royal palace on the blood arena. Zhao Fengyang didn't expect that Yi Guqin would dare to challenge the sword inquiry stele with his profound origin realm cultivation. "Good lad, I'll start with you." Zhao Fengyang licked his lips with a fierce look in his eyes. His purpose in coming to the sword inquiry stele was to obstruct Chu Qingqi of the sword sect Pagoda Forest and suppress the other sword cultivators. However, Yi Guqin's appearance gave him a target to show off. Genuine qi surged around Zhao Fengyang's body. His seventh transformation qi refinement realm cultivation was enough to make him an elite. Although he was ranked at the bottom of the heavenly saber list in the saber-conferred royal palace, his strength was definitely not weak. He held the 9 orifices golden saber on his back in his hand and infused his genuine qi into it. The entire golden saber instantly emitted a dazzling golden light. Golden Lion Saber Technique, Break Lion Shadow. Zhao Fengyang also used the Golden Lion Saber Technique. However, compared to the Golden Lion Saber Technique used by the black-clothed man, Zhao Fengyang's technique was obviously more powerful. Boom! An extremely dazzling saber radiance swept towards Yi Guqin. The surrounding martial artists were all stunned. They also did not expect that Zhao Fengyang would actually suddenly make a move. Furthermore, it was against an unknown person. "Brother, be careful." On the other side, Chu Qingqi caught a glimpse and shouted. He had been paying attention to Zhao Fengyang's every move. When he saw Zhao Fengyang make a move, he hurriedly warned Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin, who was currently comprehending the concept of sword, suddenly felt an intense pressure. He suddenly came to his senses and looked at the blade that was right in front of him. Not only was there no fear in his eyes, they were instead filled with anger. That's right, it was anger. When Yi Guqin woke up, his comprehension of the sword qi pressure also disappeared. Originally, Yi Guqin was confident that he would be able to reach a deeper level in many of his sword techniques by relying on this comprehension. But now, it had been interrupted. "Obstructing my path of sword comprehension, you must die." Yi Guqin's roar was like a thunderclap from the 9th heaven. Yi Guqin had always been calm and indifferent, and he rarely got angry. But when it came to the way of the sword, Yi Guqin would not show any mercy. Clang! The dust of calamity was unsheathed, and the sword was pointed at the sky. Split lightning sword's ultimate move, thunder roar. Yi Guqin lit up all 42 of Jie Chen's sword veins. In an instant, sword qi filled the sky while lightning shook the earth. A wisp of peerless sword qi and lightning collided with the golden blade light. Powerful ripples of sword qi and saber qi spread out in all directions, causing the surrounding rocks to tumble down. Many martial artists were sent flying by the shock waves of the qi waves. The first exchange of blows was earth-shattering. In the distance, Chu Qingqi's expression changed slightly. Zhao Fengyang was a ruthless person on the Heavenly Blade list of the sealed Saber Royal Palace. Although his ranking was low, he was definitely not someone an Essence Realm martial artist could contend with. Even if Chu Qingqi made a move, it would be difficult for him to gain any advantage over Zhao Fengyang. However, after a burst of smoke and dust dispersed, what they saw in front of them stunned everyone. Yi Guqin's figure stood tall like a pine tree. The golden light on the surface of his body was faintly discernible, and he was not injured at all. How is this possible? A martial artist in the Essence Realm is actually on par with Zhao Fengyang? Some martial artists were stunned and could not believe it. The shock wave naturally alarmed Lu Tianying, Murong Ditian, and Sidu Hongxue. It's him? Lu Tianying squinted his eyes. He naturally recognized Yi Guqin as the person who helped little Fatty that day. However, he did not make a move directly because he still had to save his energy to obtain a seat on the sword quest tablet. As for Yi Guchen, Zhao Fengyang would deal with him, so there was no need for him to make a move. Murong Ditian's gaze was indifferent from the beginning. Regardless of whether it was Zhao Fengyang or the man in bamboo hat, they were unable to threaten him. Situ Hongshue's gaze also did not fluctuate. Although Yi Guchen blocked Zhao Fengyang's attack with his Essence Realm cultivation, it was just a casual attack from Zhao Fengyang. As for Situ Ling and Murong Ming, when they looked at Yi Guchen's figure, they vaguely felt a trace of familiarity, but they did not have any impression of it. Well, he actually blocked it? Zhao Fengyang was also stunned. Even an ordinary Qi refining grandmaster would find it difficult to block his attack, let alone an Essence Realm cultivator. However, Yi Guchen blocked it. "You have angered me." Yi Guchen's gaze was as sharp as sword light, and his tone was low. "Oh, angered? You are just an Essence Realm cultivator. What qualifications do you have to talk to me like this?" Zhao Fengyang sneered, his face full of disdain. Yi Guchen did not say anything more. He held the Calamity Dust and attacked with his sword. Aurora Quicksword's unique skill, Aurora's passing. Fast. Too fast. Everyone only felt a flash of sword light. It was extremely dazzling and as beautiful as the aurora in the sky. However, it arrived in front of Zhao Fengyang in an instant. Well, how is this possible? Zhao Fengyang was shocked by the speed of Yi Guchen's sword. He blocked it with his 9 orifices golden saber. Clang! A deafening explosion rang out, and Zhao Fengyang was actually forced back a few steps. That's swordsmanship? Most of the martial artists who came to challenge the sword-seeking steel were sword cultivators. When they saw Yi Guchen attack, they were all shocked. That was a Xian Tian swordsmanship. Yi Guchen had practiced it so well. If it was an ordinary Qi refining realm sword cultivator, they might not have such a level of swordsmanship cultivation. Even Situ Hongxue and Murong Ditian were slightly surprised. They looked over slightly. That swordsmanship is... Situ Ling's mind flashed. She felt that she had seen it somewhere before. Murong Ming's eyes were also filled with doubt. Golden Lion Saber Art, Mad Lion Slash. Zhao Fengyang looked at the strange gazes around him. He was even more embarrassed and angry. The genuine Qi in his body exploded, and his cultivation of the 7th cycle of Qi refining realm completely exploded. The intense saber light was like the sun, and there was a faint sound of a lion's roar. This move caused the surrounding cultivators to fall silent. The power of this saber was very strong. Yi Guchen snorted coldly. His Vajra celestial body was operating at full strength. At the same time, he ignited his Qi and blood. The strength of dragon and elephant flowed in his meridians and then exploded. It rose on the surface of Yi Guchen's body, forming the shape of a dragon and elephant. Vacuum sword wave, stacking waves. With one move, the space shook. The void sword wave was like a huge wave, sweeping in all directions. Some people were shocked, including Lu Tianning, Situ Ling, and Murong Ming. Chapter 60. When Yi Guchen used the vacuum sword wave, Murong Ming and Situ Ling were shocked. They vaguely thought of someone. Especially Murong Ming, he had seen someone use this sword technique with his own eyes. Lu Tianning's eyes were also filled with shock. However, he was not shocked by Yi Guchen's identity, but by the vacuum sword wave that he had displayed. This is the upper spiritual sword technique of the Limitless Sword sect, the Void Sword technique. How could this brat learn it? Even I haven't learned this sword technique. Lu Tianning was shocked. The Void Sword technique was a upper spiritual sword technique. It was considered a core sword technique in the Limitless Sword sect. Even he was not qualified to learn it. However, he had seen Xian Hao use this sword technique before, so he recognized it at a glance. Rumble. Yi Guchen's 20 layers of transparent sword wave overlapped and collided with Zhao Fengyang's blade radiance. A blinding light burst out and shook the entire sky sword peak. Yi Guchen and Zhao Fengyang were at the center of the impact, so they had to bear the brunt of the shockwave. Yi Guchen's face was slightly flushed as he retreated dozens of steps. The golden light on his body flickered. It was the King Kong celestial body that was resisting the shockwave. Zhao Fengyang also retreated dozens of steps. Although it was not a big deal, his blood and vital energy were surging in his chest. After this move, there was still no clear difference in strength. This caused everyone to suck in a deep breath of air. They could tell that Zhao Fengyang had used the strength of a 7th Revolution Qi Refinement Realm cultivator, but he still could not defeat Yi Guchen. Fighting against a 7th Revolution Qi Refinement Realm cultivator with a profound Origin Realm cultivation. At this moment, everyone looked at Yi Guchen with a deep shock in their eyes. Monster. A true monster. When did such a monster appear in our Beichen mansion? He's actually able to fight against a disciple on the Heavenly Saber ranking of the Sealed Saber Royal Palace at the Essence Origin stage? Some of the cultivators looked at each other in shock. However, some sword cultivators felt relieved. The people of the Saber-conferred King's Palace had always been domineering, especially the disciples of the Heavenly Saber list. Seeing Zhao Fengyang suffer, many sword cultivators felt delighted. Who are you? Zhao Fengyang's gaze was solemn. He had originally thought that Yi Guchen was just a sword cultivator who had some fortuitous encounters. However, this was clearly not the case. Zhao Fengyang knew that even among the younger generation of his sworn enemy, the sword sect Tower Forest, there weren't many who had such profound sword skills. Zhao Fengyang's question attracted everyone's attention. Even Situ Hongxue and Murong Ditian were slightly surprised. It's you, Yi Guchen. A horrified shriek came from Murong Ming's mouth. As soon as he said this, everyone fell silent. Who was Yi Guchen? Some people were puzzled as they had never heard of this name. Lu Tianying and the others were also puzzled. Only Chu Qingqi had a strange glint in his eyes as he looked deeply at Yi Guchen. So it's him. Yi Guchen, the leader of the 7 heavenly prides of the Milky Way Prefecture. He even obtained the title of Sword Master. Suddenly, a sword cultivator seemed to have thought of something and shouted. He looked at Yi Guchen with a hint of admiration. The title of Sword Master was an unparalleled honor for sword cultivators. What? Yi Guchen? So it's him. He's actually the leader of the Milky Way Prefecture's heavenly prides. No wonder I've never heard of him before. He's not from our Beichen mansion. If that's the case, then it makes sense. He's the Milky Way Prefecture's #1 heavenly pride, the former sword master. It would be strange if such a heavenly pride couldn't even defeat Zhao Fengyang. But I've heard that Yi Guchen died as a genius. The current leader of the Milky Way Prefecture's heavenly pride seems to be Xia Yubing from the Xia clan. As Yi Guchen's name spread, it also attracted a lot of surprise and discussion. After all, the Beichen mansion was not the Milky Way Prefecture. Most of the people here were not familiar with Yi Guchen's name, but many sword cultivators remembered him. This young man who had obtained the title of Sword Master had once stunned the entire Saint Origin dynasty and was even ranked 5th on the Saint Origin Heaven Pride ranking. Unfortunately, his genius halo had fallen in the Sword King's secret realm and he was no longer famous. So he was the former Sword Master. Lu Tianying's expression was still calm. The leader of the Milky Way Prefecture's heavenly prides has recovered his cultivation. Murong Ditian also looked at Yi Guchen. As the leader of the heavenly prides in the same prefecture, Murong Ditian had naturally paid attention to Yi Guchen. However, after Yi Guchen disappeared from the crowd, Murong Ditian no longer cared about him. Even now, Murong Ditian still looked at Yi Guchen with an indifferent gaze, as if he did not put him in his eyes. If Yi Guchen did not have that setback, his current cultivation level would naturally be on par with Murong Ditian. However, Murong Ditian could also see that Yi Guchen's cultivation level was really only at the 9th level of the Essence Realm. Even if his sword skills were amazing, Murong Ditian still did not care. He is the sword master? Situ Hongxue looked at Yi Guchen with her beautiful eyes. She, who was obsessed with swordsmanship, naturally knew Yi Guchen's name. In the past, after Yi Guchen won the title of Sword Master, she had wanted to meet him to discuss swordsmanship. However, she was entangled with many things later on, so she left it at that. After that, the incident in the Sword King's secret realm happened. Situ Hongxue naturally did not have the chance to meet the Sword Master again. Now that his identity had been exposed, Yiguchen smiled and raised his hand to lift the bamboo hat, revealing a handsome face with sharp edges and sword-like eyebrows. "I'm Yi Gu-chen." The three words were sonorous and forceful. It was as if the young man who obtained the title of Sword Master had returned. So what if you are the Sword Master? It is just an empty name. You are just an ant at the 9th level of the Essence Realm. Zhao Fengyang said coldly. Yiguchen's identity was exposed, but to him, it was still a loss of face. After all, he was a disciple of the Heavenly Saber List. If he was suppressed by the former Sword Master, he would be ridiculed when he returned to the saber-conferred King Palace. Today, you have obstructed my cultivation. Only your blood can quench my anger. Yiguchen was so angry that he laughed. His aura erupted and surged into the sky. Vaguely, the roars of dragons and elephants could be heard. Kill. Yiguchen spat out the word like a powerful army. Although his cultivation level was not as high as Zhao Fengyang's, his aura was not any weaker. Golden Lion Saber Art, Fierce Lion Revolving Slash. Zhao Fengyang also slashed out with his saber. His aura was berserk and his saber light shook the surroundings like thunder. The 9 orifices golden saber slashed out consecutively. Several saber lights swept out and formed a ring. Everywhere it passed, rocks cracked and deep ravines were plowed out. Facing Zhao Fengyang's powerful attack, Yiguchen's eyes were as calm as an ancient well. He activated the 36 sword veins in his body and slashed out at the same time. This sword was like moonlight. It was mesmerizing and beautiful. It was the ultimate move of the piercing moon sword art, Moonfall. When Yiguchen executed this move, Sidu Hongshue's eyes narrowed and her rosy lips parted. She was absent-minded for a moment. That sword art? She was stunned. Chapter 61. That sword move was beautiful and enchanting. It looked beautiful, but after Yiguchen's 36 sword veins, its power multiplied. The air was torn apart as if it was made of paper. Only the dreamlike sword light collided with Zhao Fengyang's move. In an instant, the sword light and saber light were chaotic. Gravel shot into the sky and intense true chi ripples swept in all directions, causing many warriors to retreat. Zhao Fengyang and Yiguchen's bodies shook and blood flowed from the corners of their mouths. Kill. However, they did not stop at all. Yiguchen used the Willow Kaken Wind movement technique and Zhao Fengyang also used the same movement technique. The two approached each other and the Calamity Dust sword and 9 orifices golden saber collided, causing an ear-piercing sound of metal clashing. The sword and saber collided, creating intense sparks. True chi burst out and profound chi cleansed. Kid, don't think I can't subdue you. 18 mountain splitting forms, Gray Rock Crush. Zhao Fengyang was truly enraged. His aura surged violently as he unleashed his trump card. The 18 mountain splitting forms were fierce and domineering. When Zhao Fengyang used it, it had the power to split mountains. In the face of Zhao Fengyang's domineering saber technique, Yiguchen used softness to overcome hardness and used the Taiji sword technique. He drew a circle with the tip of his sword. No matter how violent Zhao Fengyang's saber chi was, it was quietly submerged. What kind of strange sword technique is this? Zhao Fengyang's expression changed for the first time. He had never heard of such a sword technique. 18 mountain splitting forms, water breaks. Each move of Zhao Fengyang's saber technique was stronger than the previous one. However, what shocked him was that no matter how he used his saber technique, he could not hurt Yiguchen. When the surrounding martial artists saw this, they were all shocked. As expected of the sword sect. In the distance, Chu Qingqi could not help but praise. He had to admit that Yiguchen's swordsmanship was not inferior to those geniuses in the inner yard of the sword sect's pagoda forest, not to mention his cultivation state. Is he really that person? That sword path, and that moon-piercing sword art at the level of great accomplishment? On the other side, Sidu Hongxue looked calm on the surface, but her heart was already in chaos. The moonfall that Yiguchen had used just now was so poignant and beautiful that it even stunned Sidu Hongxue. Then, she thought of the sword marks on the sword testing stone. It was just an ordinary piercing moon sword technique. Could it be a coincidence? Or, Sid Hongxue stared at Yi Guchen with her beautiful eyes, her jade-like hands slightly clenched. However, she didn't know that not far away, Murong Ditian had been looking at her, and his gaze was slightly gloomy. He could feel that Sidu Hongxue had been paying attention to Yi Guchen. To Murong Ditian, this sort of feeling was absolutely uncomfortable. In the arena, the battle between Zhao Fengyang and Yi Guchen had reached its climax, and the corners of their mouths were stained with blood. Damn it, I don't believe that you can withstand all of my blade techniques. 18 mountain-splitting forms, violent blades splitting mountains and rivers. Zhao Fengyang roared, and the 9 orifices golden blade in his hand exploded with the strongest power. His weapon meridians extended, and the glaring golden light was as dazzling as the sun. When he slashed out with his blade, it was as if he had slashed out a scorching sun. Even Chu Qingqi and the others' eyes twitched when they saw the intense undulations. Facing Zhao Fengyang's fierce and domineering blade, Yi Guchen smiled faintly. I'll return all of your previous moves to you. Yi Guchen's wrist shook, and the Taiji sword art in his hand changed from defense to offense. The Taiji sword art was created by Zhang Sanfeng, one of the top 10 experts in the pugilistic world. Its power was obviously not as strong as Yi Guchen's. During this period of training, Yi Guchen had also cultivated the Taiji sword art to the minor accomplishment realm. Now, the Taiji sword art could reflect 70% of the power. Boom! The Taiji sword art poured out all the power it had absorbed from the previous moves. The power was so strong that even Yi Guchen, who was using the Taiji sword art, split open the web between his thumb and index finger and bled. No, how is this possible? Zhao Fengyang was stunned. He did not expect the power of Yi Guchen's sword to be far beyond his expectations. Boom! It was as if a sun had exploded, and a strong storm of true qi shot out in all directions. Even the surrounding sword qi pressure was scattered a little. A wretched figure flew out and smashed into the ground. He spat out blood, and cracks appeared on the 9 orifices golden blade as it fell to the side. Dead silence. One could even hear some people's heavy and disorderly breathing. Zhao Fengyang was defeated. On the other side, Yi Guchen was also gasping for breath. Blood flowed down his chin from the corner of his mouth, and the web between his thumb and index finger was torn open. However, compared to Zhao Fengyang, who was lying on the ground like a dead dog, he was obviously in a much better state. This is the sword sect, the real sword sect. Some sword cultivators looked at Yi Guchen with blazing eyes. As one of the 7 major forces in the Saint Origin dynasty, the saber-conferred monarch palace had always suppressed sword cultivators. Now that they saw a disciple of the Heavenly Blade list defeated by Yi Guchen from the sword sect, they helped them vent their anger. At this moment, Chu Qingqi, Lu Tianing, Murong Ditian, Sid Hongxue, and the others were also shocked. Yi Guchen walked slowly toward Zhao Fengyang with Jieqin in his hand. Although he was also injured, Yi Guchen's condition was much better than Zhao Fengyang's due to the Vajra celestial body and his strong recovery ability. What do you want? Zhao Fengyang struggled, but he couldn't get up. He could only move backward and his tone was no longer arrogant. Instead, there was a hint of fear in his voice. He never imagined that a sword cultivator at the 9th level of the Origin Essence stage would be able to defeat him so miserably. I have said that I will use your blood to appease my anger. I am a man of my word. Yi Guchen's eyes were cold. No, I am a member of the saber-conferred monarch palace and a disciple of the Heavenly Blade list. If you kill me, you will be in endless trouble. I advise you to stop now and I can leave. Zhao Fengyang was really afraid. Although he was arrogant, he no longer had that kind of unyielding attitude when he was faced with death. The saber-conferred monarch palace? It doesn't matter. We will stand on opposite sides in the end. Yi Guchen didn't care. He was a sword cultivator. If the saber-conferred monarch palace suppressed sword cultivators, there would naturally be friction between them. Yi Guchen didn't want to cause trouble, but he wasn't afraid of it. If he had to blame someone, he could only blame Zhao Fengyang for interrupting his comprehension of the sword Dao. For a swordsman who was obsessed with the sword Dao, This grudge was absolutely irreconcilable. Die! Yi Guchen shouted. Jie Chen drew his sword and was about to end Zhao Fengyang's life. Right at that moment, a crimson light that carried a tragic and overbearing aura suddenly fell towards Yi Guchen. Yi Guchen knitted his brows. If he wanted to kill Zhao Fengyang, he wouldn't be able to avoid this fatal blow. Swish! Yi Guchen's eyes were cold as he took a few steps back. Boom! When the crimson light landed in front of Zhao Fengyang, the rubble scattered. When the dust dissipated, a crimson saber was revealed. The saber seemed to be made of blood, and the veins on it were like the blood vessels of a human. It carried a bloody aura. This is him? Not far away, Chu Qingqi's face changed drastically when he saw the crimson saber. Do you think an ant like you can kill a disciple of the saber-conferred monarch palace's heavenly blade list? A chilling voice came from the figure that was gradually climbing up. Chapter 62. That figure was a young man in his 20s. He wore a simple black robe. The most eye-catching thing about him was his messy gray hair and the scar that ran across the left side of his face. This scar added a hint of malevolence to his originally delicate and pretty face. Oh no, it's really him? Chu Qingqi's face tightened. When the other sword cultivators saw this figure appear, their eyes widened and they immediately retreated in fear. Most of these cultivators were sword cultivators, so they naturally knew who this scar-faced, gray-haired man was. Blood Saber, Mo Juechen from the Saber's Sealing Monarch Hall. This was a name that silenced all sword cultivators. This was because Mo Juechen was ranked 5th on the Heavenly Saber list. There were even rumors that he was only ranked 5th because he didn't want to compete with the other people on the list. Some even said that if Mo Juechen was serious, he could even compete with the number 1 person on the Heavenly Saber list. However, what frightened the sword cultivators wasn't Mo Juechen's reputation and status, but his hatred for sword cultivators. In the north of Heluo, Mo Juechen had killed 36 Qi Refinement Realm sword cultivators with a single slash. In the bloody battle between the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest and the Saber's Sealing Monarch Hall, Mo Juechen had killed more than 10 disciples from the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. One had to know that the inner disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest were all elite sword cultivators with extraordinary cultivation. However, Mo Juechen had killed dozens of them. Li Jingfeng, the genius sword cultivator of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, had an arm chopped off by Mo Juechen. Mo Juechen's various achievements made him famous amongst the sword cultivators. It was obvious that such a reputation had come from a bloody place. Mo Juechen, you actually came? Chu Qingqi had always been calm and easygoing, but at this moment, he was frowning with a cold expression. The sword-seeking monument is a gathering place for sword cultivators. How can I not attend this banquet? Mo Juechen slowly raised his hand and habitually touched the scar on his face. Senior brother Mo, you're here. Save me. Zhao Fengyang was delighted to see Mo Juechen. It was as though he had grasped onto a life-saving straw. The surprise he was talking about was naturally Mo Juechen's arrival. Mo Juechen snorted coldly as he glared at Yi Guchen. You are the sword cultivator who obtained the title of Sword Master? So what? Are you going to protect him? Although Yi Guchen didn't know how powerful Mo Juechen was, he could tell from the reactions of the sword cultivators and Chu Qingqi's expression that Mo Juechen wasn't a kind person. Let me think about how you'll die. How about you be hacked to death by my Zong sword? Mo Juechen took one step at a time. With every step he took, his aura grew stronger. 9 Refinement Qi Refinement Stage. The surrounding sword cultivators were all shocked. Mo Juechen's cultivation was still at the peak of the Qi refining stage. Just his vigorous Qi alone was enough to crush an ordinary Qi refining stage cultivator. Mo Juechen raised his blood-red blade, which glowed with a bloody light. Do you know why I call this saber Zongjian? Mo Juechen's fingers slowly brushed across the blade. Yi Guchen stared at him coldly. It's because it's stained with the blood of sword cultivators. Too much blood. That's why it's called Zongjian. Mo Juechen slashed out with his saber. The saber Qi, which was like a blood-red crescent moon, rushed toward Yi Guchen. Yi Guchen's expression was stern. He knew that Mo Juchen wasn't someone like Zhao Fengyang could compare to. The tribulation dust sword was in front of him. The tip of the sword drew a circle as the Taiji sword technique was executed once again. However, when the saber chi landed, Yi Guchen groaned. His rapidly healing perlicue split open again, and blood flowed out. Although Yi Guchen's physical body was strong and he had the Vajra body, he had already fought a bloody battle with Zhao Fengyang. Now that Mo Juchen, who was even stronger than Zhao Fengyang, was here, he was naturally at a disadvantage. "You're going too far." Chu Qingqi's eyes glowed with a green light. He used his fingers as a sword, and green sword chi surged from his body. He was about to help. "Chu Qingqi, this is between them. Why do you have to interfere?" At this moment, a beam of chi shot over and scattered Chu Qingqi's sword chi. The person who attacked was Lu Tianying. Although Yi Guchen's identity had been exposed, Lu Tianying wouldn't forget that Yi Guchen had helped Little Fatty. Moreover, Lu Tianying also wanted to punish Yi Guchen for the origin of the void sword technique. Just now, Yi Guchen's strength had truly shocked Lu Tianying. Now that Mo Juchen had taken action, he was naturally happy to be at ease. How could he possibly watch Chu Qingqi destroy his plan? Limitless sword sect. Very well. Chu Qingqi was slightly angry. The reason why he wanted to help Yi Guchen wasn't only because of their small interaction in Desolation City, but also because of Yi Guchen's identity as a sword master. This Mo Juchen is going too far. On the other side, Sidu Hongxue frowned slightly. She wasn't sure if Yi Guchen was the one who had held back on the sword testing stone. However, just Mo Juchen's actions were already contemptible. After all, Yi Guchen had just fought with Zhao Fengyang. "Hongxue, what does their matter have to do with us?" On the other side, Murong Ditian's heart sank when he saw Sidu Hongxue's expression. He had never seen Sidu Hongxue in such a state before. He couldn't help but dislike Yi Guchen even more. All the sword cultivators in the field held their breaths as they waited. On one side was the sword master Yi Guchen, who had just shown his talent, and on the other side was the infamous blood saber Mo Juchen. This was destined to be a shocking battle. Yi Guchen's breathing was calm. Even when facing a powerful opponent like Mo Juchen, who had gone through the 9th refinement stage, he still didn't have the slightest bit of fear. Just his bearing alone made many sword cultivators secretly applaud him. Mo Juchen looked at Yi Guchen, who had a calm expression from start to finish, and frowned slightly. "Interesting. Zhang Jian told me that it thirsts for your blood." Mo Juchen's tone was as cold as ice as he raised his saber and attacked once again. He leaped into the air, and a blood-colored saber light extended out like wings. Blood wing saber technique. Horizontal lightning sword, shocking thunder. Yi Guchen's sword struck out, and a glaring spiritual pattern exploded on the tribulation dust. It was the violent thunder spiritual pattern. One had to know that during the battle with Zhao Fengyang, Yi Guchen didn't even activate the power of the spiritual pattern. Now, it was obvious that Yi Guchen couldn't hold back anymore. The power of the violent thunder spiritual pattern was activated, and in an instant, the entire tribulation dust sword burst out with lightning, like a silver snake coiling around the entire sword. In addition, Yi Guchen's horizontal lightning sword had the lightning attribute, causing the power of this sword to be even stronger. Everyone felt that Yi Guchen was like the ruler of lightning. With a single strike, he attracted wind and thunder. Rumble. Intense sword chi and saber light shot out in all directions like the wrath of the heavens. The mountain rocks shattered, and huge cracks appeared on many rock walls. At the center of this collision, a figure spat out a mouthful of blood and flew backwards. It was Yi Guchen. On the other side, Mo Juchen also took a few steps back. He didn't seem to be injured, but the hand holding the saber was charred black. Obviously, that was the power of the violent thunder spiritual pattern. Spiritual weapon? Mo Juchen looked at Yi Guchen's sword. His Zong sword was also a spiritual weapon, but it was a low-grade one. There was only one spiritual pattern carved on it. However, from the collision just now, Mo Juchen could clearly feel that the quality of Yi Guchen's spiritual weapon was better than his Zong sword. It was at least a middle-grade one. Cough. Yiguchen clutched his chest and coughed out another mouthful of blood. Haha, Yiguchen, didn't you want to kill me? Didn't you want to use my blood to quell your anger? Now, who's the one who's going to die? Not far away, Zhao Fengyang laughed very proudly and carefreely. Yiguchen frowned, and his eyes were like sword beams that could split the sky. If I want to kill you today, even the heavens won't be able to save you. Chapter 63. Yiguchen shouted angrily, as if he was a god. His entire body was brimming with blood as he used the power of the dragon and elephant. He charged towards Zhao Fengyang like a gust of wind. Do you think you can kill him in front of me? Mo Juechen's vital energy surged in all directions as his gray hair danced in the wind. 7 tyrant blades, wave slash. Mo Juechen slashed with his blood blade and a wave of blade energy surged out. Just the impact alone was enough to break the bones of a normal Qi cultivation realm martial artist. Yiguchen's eyes were sharp as he burned all the vital energy in his body. A powerful fire engulfed Yiguchen's body, making him look like a god of war. Vacuum sword wave, overlapping waves. 20 layers of transparent sword wave spread out and stacked together before colliding with Mo Juechen's blade energy. Boom. However, this time, the blade energy broke through the sword wave and charged towards Yiguchen. Ha, Yiguchen, how are you going to kill me? Zhao Fengyang's lips were still stained with blood, but he sneered. If Yiguchen continued to attack, he would be the first to die. Oh, is that so? Yiguchen's lips curled into a cold smile. Luo Tian protection. Yiguchen's body trembled as a powerful essence energy flowed through his body. Then, it rushed out of his body and formed the image of a guardian. At the same time, Yiguchen took out a bamboo spiritual weapon. It was the Thunderfire needle that he had taken from Bei Ling. Among the many hidden weapons refined by the Bei clan, aside from the Heavenly Fire Thunderbolt and other hidden weapons, the Thunderbolt Thunderfire needle was the most powerful. It posed a great threat to even Qi refinement realm masters. If Zhao Fengyang was at his peak, he might have been able to defend himself against the Thunderfire needle. However, Zhao Fengyang was also heavily injured. Furthermore, Yiguchen had suddenly taken out this item. There was no time for him to react. Yiguchen gathered his essence energy in his palm and slammed it against the bamboo tube. Rumble! A thunderous explosion resounded, and a ball of dense oxhair needles flew towards Zhao Fengyang like a bolt of lightning. No. Zhao Fengyang's face was filled with terror. He had no chance to react at all. Pucci, those needles carried the power of thunder and lightning as they pierced through Zhao Fengyang's body. Accompanied by a blood-curdling scream, Zhao Fengyang's body crashed to the ground. His eyes were wide open as he died with everlasting regret. At the moment of Zhao Fengyang's death, the aftermath of the violent blade energy slammed into Yiguchen's body. The sharp and powerful blade energy tore apart Yiguchen's protection of all heaven. This wasn't because the all-heaven protection wasn't strong, but because Yiguchen hadn't cultivated it for long. Coupled with the limitations of his cultivation, he was unable to bring out the true might of the all-heaven protection. Even so, it was a barrier that weakened the power of the blade energy. The remaining blade energy slammed into Yiguchen. A golden glow appeared on the surface of Yiguchen's body, and he was forced back dozens of steps. His bones cracked and he spat out blood again. However, at this moment, everyone's attention was on the dead Zhao Fengyang. He really killed him? One of the onlooking sword cultivators swallowed hard. He killed a disciple of the Heavenly Blade list in front of Blood Blade Mo Juechen? Some people looked at each other and saw the shock in each other's eyes. Zhao Fengyang was a disciple of the Heavenly Blade list, not a nobody. Although Yiguchen was from the sword sect, he hadn't joined the 7 superpowers yet. He had killed Zhao Fengyang, a disciple of the Heavenly Blade list, in front of Mo Juechen. If news of this battle spread, Yiguchen's reputation would soar. He would rise again like the sun. However, Yiguchen had to survive this crisis first. Even Mo Juechen's expression froze. He hadn't expected Yiguchen to use such a method to kill Zhao Fengyang. Furthermore, he had done it in front of him. After all, Mo Juechen had protected Zhao Fengyang, but Zhao Fengyang had died in front of him. Although Mo Juechen didn't really care about Zhao Fengyang, this was a huge stain on his reputation. In an instant, the surrounding air seemed to have frozen, and the temperature dropped. It was killing intent. An extremely strong killing intent. The surrounding martial artists' expressions changed. Just this killing intent alone made them feel as if they had fallen into an ice cave. A chill ran up their spines. Yi Guchen, who was targeted by the killing intent, was under the greatest pressure. At this moment, his body wasn't in a good condition. Although he had a perverted physical body, he couldn't withstand fighting someone of a higher cultivation level than him. It could be said that Yi Guchen was a monster in the eyes of the crowd for being able to kill Zhao Fengyang. It would be abnormal if he could fight against Mo Juechen. In fact, in the eyes of the crowd, it was hard to say if this sword master could survive Mo Juechen's attack. "You must die." Mo Juechen didn't say anything else. He held the Zong sword in his hand, and a murderous aura exploded. 7 tyrant blades, sun annihilation. Mo Juechen used all his strength to activate the Zong sword. The blood blade emitted a bloodthirsty light, and weapon meridians spread out like blood vessels. With the support of the weapon meridians, Mo Juechen's attack was even more powerful. Everyone focused their eyes. If it were Chu Qingqi, Lu Tianying, or the rest, it wouldn't be easy for them to block this attack. The crimson saber seemed to have turned into a crimson sun as it slammed down on Yi Guchen. Yi Guchen was facing death, but he wasn't afraid. The tribulation dust in his hand exploded with the greatest power. The 42 weapon meridians exploded, and the broken edge spiritual inscriptions and the explosive thunder spiritual inscriptions were activated at the same time. This was the strongest form of the tribulation dust. The tribulation dust at this moment had truly unleashed the full power of its spiritual inscriptions. Oh my God, 2 spiritual inscriptions? It's a middle-grade spiritual inscriptions weapon. The sword sect actually has such a powerful weapon. The tribulation dust's great power in its peak form made all the spectators cry out in surprise. Even in the 7 great forces, only the core disciples of the sword sect could possess such a weapon. Aurora quick sword, Aurora's passing. It was the brightest divine light in the world at this moment. Boom! As if the gods of the 9 heavens were furious, a violent wave spread out. With the intersection of the two as the center, the surrounding cultivators were all pushed back by this powerful wave. Even Chu Qingqi, Lu Tianying, Murong Ditian, Sid Hongxue, and the rest were pushed back. As the dust dispersed, Yi Guchen spat out blood again. However, after retreating a few dozen steps, he attacked again. 7 tyrant blades, earth splitting. Amidst the hazy smoke and dust, a blood-red light suddenly appeared. That was Mo Juechen. He brandished his saber again and clashed with Yi Guchen. This can actually contend with Mo Juechen. After experiencing a series of shocks, the surrounding martial warriors were already speechless. The sword sect, which had been silent for a long time, had brought them too much shock and astonishment. As expected of the sword sect, Chu Qingqi sighed and immediately made up his mind. If Yi Guchen was really in danger, he would definitely step in even if Lu Tianying stopped him. Chapter 64. Bam! The two exchanged blows again. Yi Guchen retreated again, and even his sword hand was a little unstable. It wasn't that Yi Guchen's sword skills weren't good enough, but that the burden on his body had reached its peak. Perhaps a perfect body could withstand such destruction, but Yi Guchen's body had only passed the 2nd minor tribulation and had yet to reach the level of a perfect body. Although he had extremely vigorous blood qi and recovery ability, the heavily injured Yi Guchen couldn't hold on much longer. Do you have any last words? Mo Juechen could see that Yi Guchen was already at the end of his rope, and was afraid that it would be difficult for him to take another blow. Who knows the outcome before the end? Yi Guchen wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and smiled coldly. Sigh. The surrounding sword cultivators all sighed. If Yi Guchen was at his peak, he might be able to fight against Mo Juechen. But Mo Juechen didn't continue fighting. He poured his true qi into his blood saber, and the blood saber's blade was cleansed with blood-like ripples. He waved his saber twice in an instant, forming a cross that tore through the air and shattered the mountain rocks. Blood Fiend Cross Slash. Chu Qingqi's pupils shrank. This was one of Mo Juechen's killing moves, and it had once killed more than 10 Qi refinement sword cultivators. Chu Qingqi didn't hesitate any longer, and the blue sword Qi of Heaven's End exploded. However, Lu Taning blocked it with his sword. Get lost. Chu Qingqi was no longer elegant, and his eyes were sharp. This brat once used my limitless sword sex void sword art. Let Mo Juechen finish him off. Lu Tianying said coldly, and pestered Chu Qingqi. On the other side, Sid Hongxue bit her lip and was about to attack, but her shoulder was suddenly pressed down by a strong hand. It was Murong Ditian. Hongxue, Yi Guchen is bound to die, and there's nothing we can do. Let's not get involved. Climbing the sword-seeking steel is more important. Murong Ditian said indifferently. Just as Yi Guchen was about to die, the little fatty's figure appeared on a mountain not far away. Hey, it's that big brother. Little fatty was shocked. Seeing that Yi Guchen was in danger, he was about to use the divine movement secret technique's ground shrink. However, in the next moment, little fatty stopped in his tracks and looked at Yi Guchen in bewilderment. This is the Universal Sword Codex? Mo Juechen's move was almost invincible. At this moment of life and death, Yi Guchen could even clearly see the terrifying cross-shaped saber Qi, which seemed to be able to pierce through gold and shatter stone, heading straight for him. However, he didn't use any of his trump cards, such as the spirit-devouring mystic art or the little Ashura sword formation. He didn't even use the defensive hairpin that the female sword cultivator had left behind. Instead, he closed his eyes. Being on the brink of death, I haven't felt this way for a long time. What Yi Guchen needed was to experience this moment of life and death. At that moment, he activated the Universal Sword Codex in his body and the sword meridians appeared clearly. 18, 36, 72, 108. It didn't stop there. 109th sword meridians appeared again. At that moment, Yi Guchen was immersed in the feeling of the sword Qi. He had already felt it before, but he had been interrupted by Zhao Fengyang. At this moment of life and death, Yi Guchen's heart was as clear as a mirror. He got rid of all distracting thoughts and only the sword was left in his mind. Vaguely, he seemed to resonate with the sword-seeking steel. In the depths of his spiritual sense, a figure seemed to appear. It was a figure that wasn't very tall, but stood proudly like a pillar that supported the heavens. The figure suddenly stretched out a hand and pointed to the sky. Qian, then he pointed to the ground. Kun, heaven as Qian, earth as Kuan. Qian Kuan as one, unparalleled holy sword. The figure suddenly clasped his hands together as if he was trying to merge the heavens and earth into one. He used his fingers as a sword, and in an instant, an extremely dazzling golden sword energy tore through the 9 heavens like the light of the night and tore through the earth for thousands of miles. It was as though there was only one person left in the entire world. This sword move. Qian Kuan, one holy sword. Rumble. In a flash, Yi Guchen suddenly opened his eyes. The surface of his body was crystal clear, and the sword veins were rapidly opening. 130 sword veins. 160 sword veins. In the end, Yi Guchen made another breakthrough in the universal sword canon with the help of the sword Qi here. He had a total of 270 sword veins. The moment he opened his eyes, the blood evil cross cut was already close to him. Yi Guchen slowly raised Jiechen. At this moment his eyes weren't pitch black. Instead, they were surging with a bright golden radiance, like the eyes of a golden dragon. Jie Chen's sword pointed to the sky. Qian, he pointed to the ground with one finger. Kun, then, heaven and earth became one. The endless sword pressure emitted by the sword-seeking steel boiled. Qian Kun as one, unparalleled holy sword. A golden sword radiance lit up the area. Together with Jie Chen and the 270 sword veins, the power of this sword move was shocking. Boom! Under the shocked gazes of the crowd, the golden sword light tore through the blood fiend cross slash as easily as crushing dry weeds, and then swept violently towards Mo Juechen. This move wasn't made by Yi Guchen himself. Instead, it was made by resonating with the sword-seeking steel and using the endless sword pressure of the sword-seeking steel. In other words, Yiguchen was just a catalyst. The endless sword pressure of the sword-seeking steel was the real torrent. Therefore, the power of this move was far beyond what a chi cultivation realm cultivator could withstand. At this moment, Emo Juechen's expression changed. He was no longer as calm as before. He couldn't imagine how Yiguchen had managed to trigger the sword pressure of the sword-seeking steel. This move was not something he could withstand. Blood Saber Sword Burial. Emo Juechen roared and activated his chi. At the same time, he coughed out a mouthful of blood essence onto the blood saber. A spiritual pattern appeared on the blood saber. It was the bloodthirsty spiritual pattern. It could make use of Emo Juechen's blood essence to unleash an even greater power. With this move, Emo Juechen had cut off the arm of Li Jingfeng, the genius sword cultivator of the sword sect. However, this move was still broken. Emo Juechen's origin ring flashed and a blood-red shield appeared. It was a top-grade defensive spiritual weapon. This blood shield was a defensive spiritual artifact that his master had passed down to him. With Emo Juechen's cultivation, he had never used it before. However, now that he was forced into a corner, he had no choice but to take out his life-saving trump card. The golden sword light landed on the blood shield and was slightly delayed. Before Emo Juechen could rejoice, he heard a series of cracking sounds coming from the blood shield, and then, the shield was broken. Ah! A miserable cry rang out from Emo Juechen's mouth. The golden sword light flashed past, and his entire left arm was chopped off from the shoulder. Shock, astonishment, stupefaction, disbelief. At this moment, all the spectators, including Chu Qingqi, Lu Tianning, Sid Hongxue, and even the arrogant Murong Ditian, had frozen expressions. Because this sword strike was too shocking. Chapter 65. Yiguchen from the sword sect. Emo Juechen, will remember this. I will repay the debt of losing an arm with my life in the future. Emo Juechen's figure retreated rapidly. He covered the wound on his arm with his hand and roared in a hoarse voice. Since Yiguchen was able to trigger the sword pressure from the sword-seeking steel, how could Emo Juechen stay at the Sky Sword Peak to fight with him? That would be courting death. Seeing that Emo Juechen had retreated quickly after saying those words, the warriors were speechless. The broken arm on the ground was still bleeding. Some sword practitioners even pinched their faces, feeling that it was unreal. Just now, Yiguchen was about to die and was about to be killed by Emo Juechen. However, in the blink of an eye, the situation had taken a 360-degree turn. However, the destructive golden sword light was deeply imprinted in their minds. Is this the so-called sword sect? A sword practitioner murmured. Then, he looked at Yiguchen with endless fanaticism in his eyes. Cutting off blood saber Emo Juechen's arm with one sword was an amazing achievement. Chu Qingqi and the others were also shocked by Yiguchen's sword. Even Yiguchen himself had a vague impression of that sword when he recalled it. Although he had displayed that sword move, it did not mean that he had mastered the sacred sword of heaven and earth. It was just a move that resonated with the sword chi of the sword-seeking steel and was naturally displayed. In other words, if Yiguchen were to display it again, he would not be able to display that amazing move again. However, at least Yiguchen felt that the sword pressure here was no longer pressuring him. He turned to look at Lu Tianning. When Yiguchen's gaze landed on Lu Tianning, his expression changed. It was a little cold, but also a little suffocating. Geniuses like them knew that Yiguchen did not use his own strength to launch the sword attack. Instead, he used some unknown method to trigger the pressure of the sword chi in this place. However, under the sword-seeking steel of Tianjian Peak, it was hard to guarantee that Yiguchen would be able to activate the sword chi and perform that terrifying sword move again. Originally, Lu Tianning had come here to win a place on the swordsmanship-seeking steel. However, when he saw Yiguchen's gradually cold eyes, Lu Tianning's face turned ugly. No matter how unwilling he was, he could only snort and leave. Seeing Lu Tianning leave, Yiguchen's gaze swept past and landed on the peerless fairy, Sidu Hongxue. What surprised Yiguchen was that although he did not know Sidu Hongxue, Sidu Hongxue seemed to pay a lot of attention to him. At this moment, Sidu Hongshue's eyes were filled with doubt, hesitation, and curiosity. Yi Guchen shifted his gaze away once again. When he saw Murong Ditian's slightly cold and fearful expression, Yi Guchen was stunned. He didn't know when he had offended the number 1 prodigy of the Beichen mansion. However, when he thought of Situ Hongxue, he immediately understood. However, Yi Guchen was not someone who would casually look for trouble. He did not have any interactions with Murong Ditian. If Murong Ditian did not provoke him, he did not need to pay attention to him. Moreover, the more important reason was that Yi Guchen's body condition was already extremely bad. If it was not for his strong recovery ability, he would have already fallen to the ground. Borrowing the remaining power of that sword move, I will directly ascend the swordsmanship-seeking steel. Yi Guchen no longer hesitated and rushed towards the swordsmanship-seeking steel. With the power of that sword move, no one dared to obstruct Yi Guchen's path. It was not until Yi Guchen's figure was far away that the crowd came back to their senses. While exclaiming in surprise and admiration, they also followed closely behind. The swordsmanship-seeking steel was located at the top of the Sky Sword Peak. Not long after, Yi Guchen arrived at the bottom of the swordsmanship-seeking steel. Looking at it, the swordsmanship-seeking steel was simple and vigorous. It stood tall with a dignified and vicissitude feeling. On the swordsmanship-seeking steel, there were only a few names carved on it. Although the swordsmanship-seeking steel would erupt with magnificent sword chi every year, there were only a few people who could withstand the pressure of the sword chi and climb up. As for those who were qualified to leave their names on the swordsmanship-seeking steel, there were naturally even fewer. It did not mean that the higher one's cultivation level, the higher one's name could be left on the swordsmanship-seeking steel. Those who could leave their names on the steel all had their own unique comprehension of the way of the sword or were extremely talented. If one did not understand the way of the sword, no matter how powerful one would not be able to leave their names on the swordsmanship-seeking steel. Just like Zhao Fengyang, Mo Juechen and the others, they did not come here for the swordsmanship-seeking steel, but only to obstruct Chu Qingqi and the others. However, for sword cultivators, the swordsmanship-seeking steel was extremely important. Those who could leave their names on the swordsmanship-seeking steel were all people who would have great achievements on the way of the sword in the future. Yi Guchen glanced at the swordsmanship-seeking steel and could not help but be secretly speechless. Although there were not many people who had left their names on the swordsmanship-seeking steel, the sword marks they left each had their own merits. Among them, Yi Guchen also saw some names. Xian Hao, the one from the Limitless Sword sect? Yi Guchen pondered. He had also heard of Xian Hao's name. Xian Hao was the true genius of the Limitless Sword sect. It was rumored that he had already cultivated the sect's most precious sword art, the Limitless Sword art, to the initial level. The Limitless Sword art was a top-class spiritual sword art. It was extremely difficult to cultivate it to the initial level. However, Xian Hao had done it. In addition, Yi Guchen also saw a name, Yan Wushuang. The name carved on the sword edge had both the sharpness of a man and the delicacy of a woman. This name left an impression on Yi Guchen. In addition, there was another name with a dark and desolate taste. Yuan Mie, the second on the Saint Yuan genius list, Yi Guchen muttered to himself. It was said that Yuan Mie was a member of the royal family of the Saint Yuan dynasty. Although he had a rough life, his unpredictable sword art was well known throughout the dynasty. The entire swordsmanship-seeking steel was 10 meters long from top to bottom. The names Xian Hao, Yuan Mie, Yan Wushuang, and other names were at the top. Above Xian Hao and Yan Wushuang, there was another name that stood above all the genius sword cultivators like the moon surrounded by stars. Yi Guchen looked at it. Jun Xiaoyao. It's him. Almost no one has seen him before. The rumored first on the Saint Yuan genius list, Yi Guchen thought to himself. Jun Xiaoyao, the first on the Saint Yuan genius list, called Young Master Xiaoyao. No one knew who he was. No one knew his background or identity. Some even said that Jun Xiaoyao was not from the Saint Yuan dynasty. Interesting. The path of sword art is only interesting when there are opponents. Yi Guchen didn't feel the slightest pressure when he saw the names of the sword cultivators. Instead, he laughed heartily. He looked around the swordsmanship-seeking stele and saw 5 perfectly round stones that looked like chess pieces. Are those the so-called 5 spots? Yiguchen no longer hesitated and sat cross-legged on one of the stones. When Yiguchen sat down, the ground around the stones suddenly lit up with formation runes. A semi-transparent light shield enveloped Yiguchen's body, protecting him. In an instant, Yiguchen felt that his eyes and ears had become sharper. Even the tactile sensation of a breeze brushing past his ears had become extremely sharp. At this moment, Yiguchen's heart seemed to have turned into a mirror that reflected the world. Could this be the Enlightenment Stone? Yiguchen's eyes lit up with surprise. He had heard that there were some miraculous items in this world, such as the Enlightenment Stone and the Awakening Leaf, that could help one achieve enlightenment in cultivation. Of course, such miraculous items were extremely difficult to find. Without a certain amount of luck, it was almost impossible to come across one. However, Yiguchen had encountered one. It was a great luck. With Yiguchen's perception as the Sword Demon and the Enlightenment Stone, he was confident that he could take another big step forward in his path of sword art. Yiguchen didn't delay any longer. He casually took out some precious medicine and consumed it. After recovering from his injuries, he closed his eyes and entered a state of enlightenment. Chapter 66. After Yiguchen, there were also a few figures that climbed up. Surprisingly, after Yiguchen, the second person to climb up the sword-seeking stele wasn't Murong Ditien, but the little fatty. The little fatty immediately saw Yiguchen. Why does he have the Myriad Sword Codex? Could it be that he is the same as Martial Uncle and is from that clan? However, why would that clan appear in the South Horizon region? The little fatty couldn't understand. However, seeing that Yiguchen was comprehending, he didn't disturb him. Instead, he stared at those Dao comprehension stones with saliva dripping from the corner of his mouth. These are Dao comprehension stones. I wonder if they taste good. The little fatty ran to the side of a Dao comprehension stone and opened his mouth, revealing his snow-white teeth as he took a bite. So hard. The little fatty covered his mouth. That mysterious silver heavy water and meteorite iron are still all right. However, these Dao comprehension stones are like old steamed buns that have been placed there for thousands of years. The little fatty was helpless as he gave up on the idea of eating the Dao comprehension stone and sat on it instead. Fortunately, Yiguchen was currently comprehending with his eyes closed. Otherwise, he would definitely be extremely shocked if he saw the little fatty's abnormal actions. After the little fatty, the third figure walked over with a majestic gait. It was Murong Ditien. His gaze swept past Yiguchen and the little fatty with a cold expression. He had his own pride. Originally, he wanted to be the first to climb up and obtain a spot. However, he didn't expect that all the light would be snatched away by the sword sex Yiguchen. Especially when Sidu Hongxue paid attention to Yiguchen, it made Murong Ditien feel extremely uncomfortable. However, with the protection of the light barrier, Murong Ditien couldn't do anything to Yiguchen. Furthermore, he was also extremely fearful of the golden sword light that Yiguchen executed. At least before leaving the sword-seeking stele, Murong Ditien wouldn't be so foolish as to casually provoke Yiguchen. Leaving my name on the sword-seeking stele is the most important. Everything else is just empty talk. Murong Ditien didn't hesitate any longer and also sat on a Dao comprehension stone. Then came Sidu Hongxue and Chu Qingqi. Sidu Hongxue looked deeply at Yiguchen with her beautiful eyes, then sat down cross-legged on an enlightenment stone. Chu Qingqi did the same. At that moment, the 5 spots on the sword-seeking stele had been decided. Next, it would depend on who could use the Dao comprehension stone to comprehend sword techniques and leave their names on the sword-seeking stele. Of course, in addition to Yiguchen and the other 4, there were still some warriors who had climbed to the top. Although they were not qualified to compete for places, sitting cross-legged near the swordsmanship-seeking stele was also a kind of cultivation. Not long after, the entire Sky Sword Peak was occupied by numerous cultivators. Of course, compared to the cultivators who climbed the Sky Sword Peak, these cultivators were just a drop in the ocean. Murong Ming and Sidaling had also reached the peak. Although they were geniuses from super-aristocratic families, they were obviously inferior to Murong Ditian and Sidu Hongxue. After Yi Guchen's shocking sword, Murong Ming didn't even dare to breathe loudly, let alone provoke Yi Guchen. He only hoped that his brother could suppress Yi Guchen. As for Situ Ling, she was more and more interested in Yi Guchen. Although the other warriors, including Murong Ming and Situ Ling, had lost their qualifications, they still wanted to see if Yi Guchen, who had shocked them countless times, would shock them again. Or was the previous sword just a coincidence? After all, if they wanted to prove that Yi Guchen was really a Sword Dao Grandmaster, they still had to see if he could leave his name on the sword-seeking steel. Everyone was very curious whether this sword sect, which had been silent for a long time, would rise again and shock the entire Saint Origin dynasty. At this moment, Yi Guchen was isolated by the light barrier and fell into absolute silence. At the same time, with the support of the Dao Comprehension Stone, Yi Guchen felt as if he had merged with the heaven and earth. In his mind, a figure appeared. It was himself, practicing the most basic piercing moon sword art. Then, another figure appeared, performing the boundless heaven sword art. After that, the vacuum sword wave, aurora fast sword, taiji sword art, linear lightning sword, and so on all appeared in his mind. Yi Guchen was watching his own sword art from the perspective of a bystander. This kind of comprehension was very novel. As the saying goes, the onlooker sees more clearly than the onlooker. Yi Guchen might be able to see the flaws in other people's sword art, but he might not be able to see through his own sword art. This was the case even for the sword demon in his previous life. Perfect sword art was Yi Guchen's highest pursuit. Now, Yi Guchen was comprehending his own sword art from the perspective of a bystander. He had gained a lot. While Yi Guchen was meditating, the other four people also had their own meditations, but the methods they used were different. For example, Little Fatty, in his visualization, there was only a sword floating in the chaotic fog. Chu Qingqi, on the other hand, seemed to have transformed into a rock, flying above the ninth heaven. But one thing was certain, including Yi Guchen, all five of them had gained something of their own. Finally, after a day, one of them finally opened his eyes. It was Little Fatty. There seemed to be a trace of confusion in his eyes, as if he had just woken up. Who is that guy? Some people did not know who Little Fatty was. I don't know, although I don't know his identity. He angered Master Gu, Lu Tianying, and the others at the Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce's auction. Little Fatty was the first to come to his senses, but he looked at the sword-seeking steel and did not intend to leave his name on it. Is he not going to make a move? Some people were puzzled. After Little Fatty got up, his enlightenment stone directly disappeared in the formation. Little Fatty did not mind. He glanced at Yi Guchen and murmured, "I have a feeling, brother, we will meet again." After muttering to himself, the Little Fatty patted his butt and left under the stunned gazes of the crowd. Damn it, isn't this a waste of a spot? Many warriors wailed. They wanted to leave their names on the sword-seeking steel but did not have the chance. But Little Fatty left directly without a care. Maybe he knows that he doesn't have the ability to leave his name. Some warriors guessed. Everyone nodded inwardly to comfort themselves. After another day, Sidu Hongxue, who was dressed in a snow-white robe, suddenly opened her beautiful eyes. Then she slowly got up. The primordial ring flashed between her slender fingers, and the divine spiritual weapon, Wang Ningmei, fell into her jade-like hand. Seeing Sidu Hongxue stand up, many warriors and sword cultivators became alert. Sidu Hongxue's eyes widened, looking forward to Sidu Hongxue's performance. But in truth, compared to Murong Ditian, Chu Qingqi and the other heaven prides, Sidu Hongxue was more famous for her beauty. Although Sidu Hongxue was ranked 7th on the heaven prides list and possessed extraordinary strength, her beauty naturally covered up her cultivation base and strength. This was also why Sidu Hongxue was so determined. If it was before, Sidu Hongxue might not have been sure if she could leave her name on the sword-seeking steel. However, after the sword testing stone's guidance, Sidu Hongxue's understanding of her own sword skills had improved tremendously. Coupled with the enlightenment she had gained from the enlightenment stone, Sidu Hongxue was filled with confidence. Chapter 67. When the beauty attacked, everyone watched carefully. Regardless of whether they could leave their names on the sword seeking steel or not, just watching her sword dance was a kind of enjoyment. Sidu Hongxue clenched her fists tightly. Her sword was graceful, like a fairy riding the waves. There was a unique charm in her graceful movements. The warriors felt the spring breeze blowing on their faces, intoxicating them. At other times, they felt the autumn maple rustling and the grass and trees withered. Sometimes it was as blazing as summer, and sometimes it was as cold as winter. Many warriors were surprised. They had only heard of Sidu Hongshue's name before, but they did not expect her swordsmanship to be so skillful. Even if she was not as good as those true sword masters, she was still very experienced. How could they know that Sidu Hongshue's improvement was so great because of Yi Guchen's guidance? At this moment, Sidu Hongxue was not distracted by external things. She focused on the four-season swordsmanship. The sword moves that were originally just for show seemed to have come alive at this moment. Sister Hongxue is so powerful. Sidu Ling was stunned. Sidu Hongxue let out a delicate cry. The genuine qi in her body was fully activated. She struck out with her sword toward the sword-seeking steel. As the sword danced, Sidu Hongshue's four beautiful sword marks appeared on the sword-seeking steel. It was in the middle, and above it were the names of Xian Hao, Yan Wushuang, and the others. After Sidu Hongxue left her name on the sword-seeking steel, the sword-seeking steel suddenly burst out with a ray of light, and then a stream of light directly entered between Sidu Hongshue's eyebrows. Sidu Hongxue closed her eyes to comprehend, and then opened them with joy. Obviously, she had gained a lot. The surrounding warriors were all envious. The reason why the sword-seeking steel was so popular was that someone had once again obtained a king-level swordsmanship. And now, Sidu Hongxue had obviously obtained something that satisfied her. After the joy, Sidu Hongxue seemed to have thought of something, and her beautiful eyes turned to Yi Guchen, who still did not move at all. Was it really him? Sidu Hongxue hesitated. Although the trip to the sword-seeking steel was a success for her, she still wanted to know if the person who had left a move on the sword-testing stone was Yi Guchen. After Sidu Hongxue, Chu Qingqi also opened his eyes and stood up. At this moment, the green sword qi around his body seemed to have materialized. Many cultivators were shocked. They knew of the Heaven Limit Blue Skies art in the Sword Sex Forest of Pagodas. It was a true spirit-level cultivation method. At this moment, Chu Qingqi clearly had a deeper understanding of it. Chu Qingqi smiled brightly. Soon after, he used his fingers as a sword. A powerful green sword qi gushed out, as if it wanted to soar into the 9 heavens. With a wave of the sleeves, the winds and clouds rise to the heavens. Chu Qingqi pointed with his sword and a blue sword aura burst out, leaving 3 words on the sword-seeking steel. Chu Qingqi's name was slightly higher than Sidu Hongshue's, but he was still some distance away from Xian Hao, Yan Wushuang, and the others. However, this did not mean that Chu Qingqi was not powerful. It was just that Xian Hao and the others were too monstrous. Many cultivators were not surprised that Chu Qingqi could leave his name on the sword-seeking steel. After all, he was an outstanding talent who had been famous for a long time in the inner court of the Sword Sex Forest of Pagodas. After Chu Qingqi left his name, he also received an opportunity from the sword-seeking steel. Next, everyone looked at Murong Ditian and Yi Guchen. Only the 2 of them were left. Everyone was guessing whether or not they would be able to leave their names on the sword quest steel. The majority of the people didn't doubt Murong Ditian. However, they didn't know much about Yi Guchen. They also didn't know if Yi Guchen truly had that kind of ability or if he had used some kind of method. However, everyone was very curious about this kind of competition. One was the number 1 Heaven's Pride of Beichen Prefecture. The other was once the number 1 Heaven's Pride of Milky Way Prefecture. The collision between the number 1 Heaven's Prides of 2 prefectures was very exciting. However, no matter the outcome, after the sword-seeking steel, Yi Guchen's name would definitely spread throughout the entire Beichen Prefecture and even the surrounding prefectures. This Yi Guchen can't be compared to Big Brother. Big Brother will definitely trample him under his feet. Murong Ming thought viciously. Although he did not dare to provoke Yi Guchen now, It did not mean that he did not hate Yi Guqin. Situ Hongxue, Sideling, Chu Qingqi, and the others did not leave. Instead, they waited for the result. After another half a day, Murong Ditian, who had been sitting cross-legged, finally moved. He slowly opened his eyes. Along with his awakening, an aura like that of an awakened lion spread out. He slowly stood up, and the true qi in his body surged and spread in all directions. The surrounding people all retreated. At this moment, they looked at Murong Ditian. He was like a monument that stood between heaven and earth, and he carried a domineering aura that could suppress everything. The number 1 heaven's pride of Beiqin Prefecture lived up to his name. Mysterious heaven sword art, sword sweeping 8 desolation. Murong Ditian's sword fingers swept out, and in an instant, a violent sword aura exploded. A total of 8 sword auras that could split heaven and earth shot out and landed on the sword-seeking steel. Initial stage. It's a spirit-grade sword art at the initial stage. A sword cultivator roared with a hoarse voice. A spirit-grade sword art at the initial stage. Many cultivators took a deep breath. In order to determine whether a heaven's pride had the ability, one had to see if he had practiced a spirit-grade sword art to the initial stage. Right now, the sword sweeping 8 desolation that Murong Ditian had used was the ultimate move of the mysterious heaven sword art. At this moment, a wisp of deep shock surged into everyone's eyes. Even Sidu Hongshue's beautiful eyes surged with a wisp of shock. She knew that her fiancé was extremely talented, but she did not expect him to be so talented. It was too difficult to reach the initial stage of a spirit-grade sword art. It required a great amount of comprehension and strength. Perhaps it would be easier for experts who had broken through the life and death threshold to cultivate a spirit-grade sword art. However, it would be countless times more difficult for qi refinement experts like them. Even with the support of the Tao Comprehension Stone, Sidu Hongxue was still one step away from the initial stage of the 4-season sword art. Rumble. 8 vigorous and domineering sword qi landed on the sword-seeking steel with a loud bang. Following the dissipation of the smoke and dust, Murong Ditian's 4 domineering and fierce sword marks were deeply imprinted on the sword-seeking steel. Everyone focused their eyes and looked over. All of them revealed a shocked expression. Murong Ditian's 4 words were only an inch away from Xian Hao, Yan Wushuang and the rest. Xian Hao, Yan Wushuang, Yuan Mie and the rest were all publicly acknowledged heaven's pride of the sword Tao in the Saint Origin dynasty. Their talent was extraordinary, and their talent in the sword Tao far exceeded that of ordinary people. Although Murong Ditian was the number 1 heaven's pride of the Beiqin Manor and ranked 5th on the Saint Origin heaven's pride ranking, he was still lacking in fame compared to the heaven's pride of the 7 great factions and the royal family. However, the ranking of the sword marks meant that Murong Ditian was not inferior to these heaven's pride of the sword Tao. In fact, if he succeeded in his cultivation in the future, he could even be on par with them. At this moment, even Chu Qingqi's gaze towards Murong Ditian was somewhat serious. Chu Qingqi thought to himself, Murong Ditian's talent in the sword Tao is comparable to senior sister Yan's? Most importantly, Murong Ditian had already been decided to become a disciple of the Limitless Sword Sect. In other words, the Limitless Sword Sect would have another heaven's pride of the Limitless Sword Sect apart from Xian Hao and the rest. If that's the case, the pressure on my sword sect's pagoda forest will be even greater in the Void Sword realm. Chu Qingqi frowned, but for some reason he turned his gaze towards Yi Guqin. If this sword master can join my sword sect's pagoda forest. Chapter 68. Murong Ditian's performance had truly stunned everyone. Originally, the number 1 prodigy of the Beiqin mansion already carried enough weight. If this matter was spread out, Murong Ditian's reputation would definitely reach a new level. Beside the sword-seeking steel, the only one who had yet to make a move was Yi Guqin. Murong Ditian looked at the sword mark on the sword-seeking steel and frowned slightly. He seemed to be slightly dissatisfied that his ranking was slightly lower than Xian Hao and the others. His gaze turned towards Yi Guqin, and the corner of his mouth curled up into a sneer. He wanted to let Sidu Hongxue know that only he was the true prodigy of the sword Tao. In the future, he would be able to sweep through a region with his sword. He was far from someone like Yi Guqin, who had appeared out of nowhere, could compare to. Not only Murong Ditian, Chu Qingqi, Sidu Hongxue, Sidu Ling, Murong Ming, and the other martial practitioners all cast their gazes towards Yi Guqin. Among these gazes, there was curiosity, anticipation, coldness, and disdain. Yi Guqin, since you have already fallen silent, then stay silent forever. Murong Ming said coldly in his heart. The atmosphere of the entire sword-seeking steel seemed to have frozen. Vaguely, there was an indescribable Tao rhyme spreading. With Yi Guqin as the center, it was like a whirlpool. And this feeling, some martial practitioners were shocked. They seemed to have come into contact with an indescribable Tao rhyme. Then, their gazes all landed on Yi Guqin. Sigh, a sigh lightly floated, like a withered leaf falling to the ground. That was Yi Guqin. His eyelids trembled slightly and he opened his eyes. A sense of vicissitudes flashed past his eyes. Yi Guqin stood up and looked at the sword-seeking steel. He frowned and pondered. Could it be that Yi Guqin didn't gain anything? The surrounding martial practitioners looked at Yi Guqin's serious expression and couldn't help but guess. As expected. He merely had a fortuitous encounter. Murong Ming laughed, and his heavy heart suddenly relaxed. Murong Ditian was the same. Although he didn't reveal a smile, the bottom of his heart seemed to have faintly relaxed. After all, no Sky Pride wanted to see another Sky Pride overshadow their own brilliance. Unfortunately, that sword ancestor didn't gain anything. I had thought that he could be my opponent. Murong Ditian sighed as if it was a pity. His voice was not soft. It was obvious that he was talking to Sidu Hongxue, who was not far away. Sidu Hongxue's brows furrowed slightly, as if she had some doubts. Although she was not sure whether Yi Guqin was the one who had kept his skills on the sword-testing stone, she was sure that he had great attainments in the art of swordsmanship based on the shocking sword he had displayed before. But right now, Yi Guqin actually gained nothing from the Enlightenment Stone. This was somewhat inconceivable. Could it be that Yi Guqin was really a silver spear? Such a thought involuntarily appeared in everyone's minds. However, at this moment, Yi Guqin wasn't moved by anything. He gazed at the sword-seeking steel, and at the names that were marked with sword scars. Yi Guqin laughed, and his tightly furrowed brows relaxed. What's he laughing at? Has he already given up? Perhaps he knows that he can't leave his name on the sword-seeking steel, so he's using a laugh to demonstrate his embarrassment. Murong Ming's lips curled into a mocking smile. On the other side, Chu Qingqi was also paying close attention. He was still unable to see through Yi Guqin's depths. Those who can leave their names on the sword-seeking steel are indeed dragons and phoenixes in the way of the sword, but Yi Guqin suddenly spoke. He paused for a moment, and then a deep and solemn sentence slowly came out of his mouth. Why would I, Yi Guqin, need a sword-seeking steel to prove my way of the sword? These words were like a deafening sound that resounded in everyone's ears. These words were like a clap of thunder that stirred up the clouds in the 9 heavens. In an instant, the entire sky sword peak seemed to tremble and rumble, as if the way of the heavens was furious. A powerful and unparalleled sword chi pressure poured out of the sword-seeking steel with a loud bang. This pressure was far stronger than before, and this pressure was only directed at Yi Guqin. The others weren't affected at all. What? Is Yi Guqin crazy? What a terrifying sword pressure. Yi Guqin has angered the sword-seeking steel. Some warriors were so shocked that their faces turned pale. They quickly retreated, not daring to get close to the sword-seeking steel. Chu Qingqi, Murong Ditian, Sidu Hongxue, and the others also retreated, their eyes fixed on Yi Guqin. It should be known that everyone who came to the sword-seeking steel wanted to leave their names on the sword-seeking steel, become famous, and then obtain the opportunity of the sword-seeking steel. However, Yi Guqin actually said that his way of the sword didn't need to be proven by the sword-seeking steel. What an arrogant and ignorant Yi Guqin. Does he really think of himself as a sword master? Murong Ming sneered. He might explode under the sword pressure of the sword-seeking steel. Murong Ditian's eyes blazed as he said coldly. On the other side, Sidu Hongxue slowly clenched her jade-like hands. She was pulled by an unknown and complicated emotion. Was this Yiguchen arrogant, or was he truly capable? Boom. The unparalleled sword pressure was like a wave that pressed down on Yiguchen layer by layer. In an instant, Yiguchen felt as if he was hit by thousands of waves. All the bones in his body cracked, and his body that had just recovered a little was seriously injured again. A trace of blood flowed from the corner of Yiguchen's mouth. Golden light bloomed on the surface of his body as he used his Vajra body to resist the sword pressure. Yiguchen had to admit that the person who left behind this sword-seeking steel was indeed a peerless way of the sword expert. However, Yiguchen wasn't just Yiguchen. He was also the sword demon, the Dugubai. The peerless sword demon that had ruled the world for over 40 years and had never tasted defeat. It was absolutely impossible to make this sword demon lower his head and use the sword-seeking steel to prove his way of the sword talent. If I want to prove my way of the sword, is a sword-seeking steel worthy? Yiguchen cracked open his mouth and revealed a blood-stained smile. His calamity dust sword was drawn, and a unique sword rhythm pervaded the air. What exactly does this Yiguchen want to do? Everyone, including Sidu Hongxue, was puzzled. Could it be that Yiguchen really wanted to contend against the sword-seeking steel with his own strength? Yiguchen's chi and blood erupted, and the power of dragon and elephant poured out. The 270 sword veins in his body were all activated. At the same time, the 42 vessel veins of the Calamity Dust Sword were also activated. The Broken Edge spiritual pattern and the Violent Thunder spiritual pattern were also activated. Apart from the soul-devouring secret skill and other trump cards, Yiguchen had activated almost all of his skills. Piercing moon swordsmanship, Yiguchen drew his sword. It seemed to be the most ordinary piercing moon swordsmanship. However, this sword was simple yet not simple. For any martial artist who had just stepped into the way of the sword, the piercing moon swordsmanship was the most basic sword technique. Some geniuses even disdained to cultivate the piercing moon swordsmanship. However, at this moment, the onlooking sword practitioners, including Murong Ditian, Chu Qingqi, and the others, couldn't see through Yiguchen's sword. It was indeed the piercing moon swordsmanship. However, it didn't seem to be the piercing moon swordsmanship. Could it be? An extremely absurd thought appeared in everyone's mind. If there was only one possibility, it might be because this wasn't the perfect fusion-level piercing moon swordsmanship, but transformative level. Chapter 69. The transformative realm, as the name suggests, refers to reaching the transformative realm. It is the highest realm of martial arts. Perhaps only the creator of the transformative realm could reach this realm. This realm allows one to go beyond martial arts and create the ultimate move. This was a realm that all martial artists wanted to reach, but it was too difficult. Even a mediocre sword technique like the piercing moon swordsmanship was extremely difficult to cultivate to the transformative realm, let alone a spiritual level sword technique. Moreover, no one would be willing to cultivate a mediocre sword technique for more than 10 years to reach the transformative realm. However, it was even harder to reach the transformative realm for a higher level of martial arts. Therefore, it was considered good for martial artists to cultivate all kinds of martial arts to the small success stage. As for the great success stage, it was even rarer. As for the perfection stage and the transformative realm, not many martial artists were willing to spend too much effort on it. This showed how rare martial arts of the transformative realm were. However, Yiguchen had achieved it. Along with his sword, the most simple Taoist rhymes of the piercing moon swordsmanship filled the air. Everyone was shocked to see that behind Yiguchen, an illusory sea appeared. In the sea, a bright moon rose slowly. Are my eyes playing tricks on me? The surrounding martial artists were dumbfounded. They did not expect the common piercing moon swordsmanship to have such a mysterious evolution after reaching the transformative realm. No, that's not a real moon. A swordsman roared. That bright moon was indeed not a moon, but was formed by sword chi. A terrifying word appeared in everyone's mind. Sword chi taking form. Only by practicing a sword technique to the highest level could such an evolution occur. At this level, the power of the sword technique would increase exponentially. This is the ultimate move of the piercing moon swordsmanship. I call it the sea rising bright moon. Yiguchen swung his sword. The blade was clean, and along with the bright moon, it bombarded the sword-seeking steel. An unprecedented storm of sword chi spread out with a roar, shaking the surroundings and stirring up the wind and clouds. The entire heavenly sword peak seemed to be trembling because of this. Huge rocks fell, and thick cracks spread out. It really is him? Sidu Hongshue's beautiful eyes lost focus, and her cherry lips trembled. The moment Yiguchen drew his sword, the intelligent Sidu Hongxue instantly understood that the Dao runes of the piercing moon sword art would not change. Yiguchen was the one who had held back on the sword testing stone. He was also the only person that Sidu Hongxue had ever seen who had perfected his swordsmanship. At this moment, the image of Yiguchen striking with his sword was deeply engraved in Sidu Hongshue's heart. Only now did she realize that there really were people in this world who were so devoted to the sword Dao. Yiguchen's figure was infinitely elevated in Sidu Hongshue's heart. Transformative stage, damn it. However, even if he is in the transformative stage, he should not be able to destroy the sword-seeking steel. On the other side, Murong Ditian's expression was unsightly. The ultimate move of the piercing moon sword art in the transformative stage was so powerful that even he was slightly shocked. He thought that he might be able to withstand Yiguchen's sword, but the outcome would be unpredictable. Crack, under everyone's shocked and almost sluggish gaze, the sword-seeking steel slowly spread out with cracks. Is it still not enough? Yiguchen raised his eyebrows. If it is not enough, then, again. Yiguchen's swordsmanship changed again. Streaks of sword marks swept out, as if it was the orbit of the heavens. Gosh, that is a small success stage spiritual sword art. They originally thought that Yiguchen had brought enough shock, but now, Yiguchen actually displayed a spiritual sword art again. Boundless Heaven sword art, and it was a small success stage Boundless Heaven sword art. Yiguchen originally had the talent of Sword Devil, and he was only a little bit away from the small success stage Boundless Heaven sword art. However, on the Dao Comprehending Stone, Yiguchen finally broke the barrier. Boundless Heaven Wheel. The countless sword trajectories that Yiguchen displayed instantly overlapped and turned into an extremely sharp sword wheel that seemed to be able to tear the void apart. Rumble. The power of a spiritual sword art's ultimate move could be seen from Murong Ditian's sword sweep all directions. However, the Boundless Heaven sword art was of a higher level than the Mysterious Heaven sword art, and its power was naturally one level higher. Boom. After receiving Yiguchen's two ultimate moves, the cracks on the sword-seeking steel rapidly spread. Then, under everyone's astonished gazes, it suddenly exploded. The sword-seeking steel that had towered in the sky sword peak for many years was shattered. Along with the shattering of the sword-seeking steel, the names on the steel naturally turned into dust. At this moment, Murong Ditian felt a tightness in his chest, and his complexion turned slightly pale. Murong Ditian clenched his teeth as a thought uncontrollably crept into his mind. He had left his name on the sword-seeking steel, but Yiguchen had shattered the sword-seeking steel. Could it be that he was really inferior to Yiguchen? When this thought appeared, Murong Ditian instantly bit his lips and regained his clarity. At the same time, his expression was extremely ugly. Inner demon. The moment the sword-seeking steel shattered, a trace of inner demon appeared in Murong Ditian's heart, and the origin of this inner demon was Yiguchen. With this trace of inner demon, if Murong Ditian wanted to break through in the future, there would be an additional obstacle. In order to eliminate this inner demon, the only way was to kill Yiguchen. Yiguchen? At this moment, Murong Ditian had already treated Yiguchen as a thorn in his heart that had to be removed. The moment the sword-seeking steel shattered, the entire heavenly sword peak started to tremble like an awakened huge dragon. At the location of the shattered sword-seeking steel, a mysterious and indescribable formation suddenly lit up. In a split second, Yiguchen's figure disappeared in a divine radiance. Everyone was shocked and felt baffled for a moment. Looking around, only the shattered remains of the sword-seeking steel remained. The sword-seeking steel that had many sword geniuses engraved on it was only left with a pile of remains. Many people guessed that Yiguchen might have activated the formation of the exceptional expert who had left behind the sword-seeking steel and had been obliterated. There were also people who said that it was something similar to a spatial formation, and Yiguchen had obtained an opportunity. However, no matter what, the battle at the sword-seeking steel would definitely spread throughout the entire Beichen prefecture, and even the surrounding prefectures. As for the sword sex Yiguchen, who had disappeared from everyone's sight, he would once again enter everyone's sight. After Yiguchen disappeared, the entire heavenly sword peak quietened down. The sword-seeking steel had also been destroyed, and would no longer burst forth with sword chi. Many martial practitioners also left with their hearts that had yet to calm down. Hongxue, let's go as well. Forcefully suppressing the surging emotions in his heart, Murong Ditian said to Sidu Hongxue, I want to stay here. Sidu Hongxue did not bother about Murong Ditian and directly sat down cross-legged. A trace of deep viciousness flashed past Murong Ditian's eyes, and he said coldly that Yiguchen might already be dead. Sidu Hongxue acted as if she did not hear anything. Murong Ditian clenched his fist, took a deep breath, flicked his sleeves, and left. At the same time, he said, not long later, it will be our wedding day. It's better to make some preparations. Situ Hongxue closed her eyes, but her brows were slightly knitted. She did not know why, but only the lonely figure of Yiguchen remained in her heart. If there was really someone who could be called a swordsman in this world, it would probably be Yiguchen. Situ Hongxue thought in her heart. On the other side, Chu Qingqi had originally planned to investigate Yiguchen's whereabouts. However, when he thought that Yiguchen would probably participate in the 10 prefectures elite gathering, he directly left. He wanted to spread this news to the inner court as soon as possible. At this moment, only Sidu Hongxue was left in the entire heavenly sword peak. At this moment, Yiguchen was in a strange space. Chapter 70. When the divine light rose, Yiguchen felt as if the surrounding void was distorted. The next moment he came to a strange space. Yiguchen had already expected such an unforeseen event. In fact, Yiguchen had noticed it the moment he saw the sword-seeking steel. The sword-seeking steel was not so much a place of opportunity as it was a place of test. Under the sword-seeking steel, on the Enlightenment Stone, one could comprehend one's own way of the sword. Only those who truly understood the way of the sword could break this barrier. And the sword-seeking steel was this barrier. With the sword demon's vision, he saw through it at a glance, so he did not hesitate to break the sword-seeking steel with his sword. Yiguchen looked around and sized up this strange space. He saw that the sky was high and the earth was deep, as if it was a real world. But Yiguchen knew that it was not the case. The reason for that was because he had sensed an intense sword aura that filled the entire area. Even the grass and trees contained sword aura. He casually picked up a small pebble under his feet. The pebble shook with a loud rumble, and a miniature sword chi burst out. This world is full of sword chi. An absolute expert of the way of the sword. Just as Yiguchen was thinking to himself, the sky suddenly changed color. The rolling clouds surged and turned into countless cyan sword chi in the blink of an eye. That scene was like a rain of swords falling from the sky. Rumble. As if the way of the heavens was angry, countless cyan sword chi fell like rain. Yiguchen's eyes shone with divine light. He held the tribulation dust in his hand and was fearless. Is this also one of the tests? Yiguchen was fearless. He performed his swordsmanship. The sea behind him overturned and a bright moon rose. Bright moon rising from the sea. This was a move that turned something rotten into something magical. He comprehended the true essence of sword chi with the most inferior moon-piercing swordsmanship. Clang. Continuous sounds of collisions rang out. The bright moon of sword chi wrapped around Yiguchen's body. Countless green sword chi fell densely, bursting forth with countless explosions. However, how could a person fight against the heavens? Even the piercing moonsword technique's ultimate technique could not withstand the endless rain of swords. Finally, with a loud bang, the bright moon of sword chi exploded. Countless green sword chi rained down on Yi Guchen's body like thousands of swords. Countless wounds appeared on Yi Guchen's body. What was even more bizarre was that the green sword chi seemed to have a life of its own as it entered Yi Guchen's body through the wounds. In a split second, Yi Guchen felt as if his flesh and blood were about to split apart. That was a sword chi that could cut through metal and jade, yet it penetrated into his body and tore apart his tendons, flesh, bones, and blood. For a moment, Yi Guchen spat out a mouthful of blood. His entire body was blood red, and he looked extremely terrifying. However, even though he was severely injured, Yi Guchen's expression did not change much. He sat cross-legged on the ground, his hands forming the heart-concentrating spell. At the same time, his blood and chi surged and his profound chi cleansed, trying to force out the green sword chi. However, in this confrontation, Yi Guchen was clearly at a disadvantage. Just as Yi Guchen's life was in danger, the mysterious Thunder Tribulation Sword that had been silent for a long time in his body suddenly released endless lightning that flowed along Yi Guchen's tendons and veins. When the green sword chi came into contact with the lightning, it was like a mouse coming into contact with a cat. It was afraid that it would be too late to avoid it. In this process, Yi Guchen suddenly realized that some of the green sword chi had been integrated into his body by the power of the Thunder Tribulation Sword. Moreover, Yi Guchen realized that under the tug of the green sword chi and the lightning, some of the sword veins in his body had actually opened up again. 270, 273, 300. Finally, at a certain moment, 360 sword veins appeared in Yi Guchen's body. When the last sword vein was formed, Yi Guchen's body suddenly shook. Immediately, an extremely powerful aura was released from his body. Golden light surged on the surface of Yi Guchen's body. The white sword veins turned golden in an instant. 360 golden sword veins formed a complete major circulation. At this moment, Yi Guchen's cultivation of the first volume of the Universal Sword Codex had reached perfection. Boom! Yi Guchen held the Thunder Tribulation Sword and roared to the sky. Endless green sword chi entered his body. When the green sword chi entered Yi Guchen's body, it was suppressed by the Thunder Tribulation Sword and the golden sword veins. Yi Guchen's aura climbed to the peak of the 9th level of the Essence Origin realm. As long as Yi Guchen wanted to, he could break through to the Qi refining realm. However, Yi Guchen suppressed the feeling of breaking through. He formed a seal with his hands and started to cultivate the other body tempering technique besides the muscle tendon changing scripture. Marrow cleansing scripture. Yi Guchen wanted to use the green sword chi here to cleanse his organs and bones and cultivate the marrow cleansing scripture. At this moment, the scene was shocking. The sky was overturned. The sword chi was like rain, forming a sword chi storm. In the center of the storm was Yi Guchen, who was sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed. With the double suppression of the Thunder Tribulation Sword and the golden sword veins, the green sword chi could not cause any trouble in Yi Guchen's body. Instead, after cleansing Yi Guchen's organs and bones, the green sword chi quietly merged into his body. Yi Guchen was also keenly aware that there seemed to be a trace of sword essence in every Saiyan sword chi. Although this strand of sword intent was extremely minute, it should be known that the boundless sword rain that filled the sky contained a strand of sword intent within each strand of sword chi. This kind of method was a bit terrifying. Yi Guchen was sure that this method could only be performed by the peerless sword principle expert who left behind the sword-seeking steel. After an unknown period of time, Yi Guchen's bones were covered with a faint layer of green and gold. Although it was very painful to cleanse the organs and bones with the green sword chi, the effect was very significant. If the muscle tendon changing scripture was to cultivate the tendons and meridians, then the marrow cleansing scripture was to cultivate the organs and bones. Although Yi Guchen's Vajra body was powerful, it only cultivated the skin and tendons. The internal organs were easy to be injured. However, if he succeeded in cultivating the marrow cleansing scripture, Yi Guchen's internal organs and bones would be undamaged. Only when both methods were cultivated to perfection could Yi Guchen cultivate the legendary Vajra body in the Jianghu in his previous life. Now, Yi Guchen had taken a big step forward. No, I can't absorb any more green sword chi. At a certain moment, Yiguchen opened his eyes, which were shining with green light. He noticed the bottleneck in his body. Although his body was strong, his cultivation was only at the peak of the 9th level of the essence origin realm. He could not absorb any more green sword chi. If he wanted to absorb more green sword chi, he could only wait for Yiguchen to make another breakthrough. Maybe it was because there were more green sword chi in his body, but the sword chi in the sky did not attack Yiguchen anymore. Not bad. Suddenly, a voice sounded in the sky. It was a calm voice. Yiguchen was shocked. He focused his eyes and looked at the source of the voice. It was a middle-aged man in simple coarse clothes. His face was so ordinary that there was nothing special about it. He was the kind of person who could not be recognized in a crowd. However, it was such an ordinary man who was surrounded by the green sword chi in the sky like an obedient pet. Such a scene, no matter how ordinary his face was, became extraordinary. Chapter 71. Are you the owner of the swordsmanship-seeking steel? Yiguchen asked in a serious tone. This figure was the mysterious figure who had released the sacred sword of heaven and earth when Yiguchen resonated with the sword chi outside the swordsmanship-seeking steel. Smart kid, you're right. I'm the one who left the swordsmanship-seeking steel, but now I'm just a consciousness doppelganger. The middle-aged man's tone was gentle and calm. Who are you? Yiguchen asked. You can call me. The middle-aged man smiled and said. The 8th generation sword master, Yitianxing. The 8th generation sword master, Yitianxing? Yiguchen frowned. Although he looked calm on the surface, there was a surge of shock in his heart. Sword sect. This was a name that he couldn't be more familiar with. The title of young sword master, the sword sect pagoda forest, and the 8th generation sword master. All of these were like many intertwined threads. Yiguchen seemed to have vaguely touched some of the veins. Did you think of something? Yes, the competition for the title of sword master in the Saint Origin dynasty was created by me. Tianxing said lightly. This was vaguely. Yiguchen seemed to have sensed a trap. Alas? Tianxing sighed and said, things change and calamities arise again. There are many things that cannot be said, but you only need to know that I'm selecting the 9th generation successor. Sure enough, Yiguchen's eyes flashed. He was not surprised at all. The swordsmanship-seeking steel was obviously a test. However, Yiguchen had no intention of being anyone's successor. He was originally arrogant. Even in this world, Yiguchen did not think that anyone could be his master. Sorry? Yiguchen wanted to say something, but Tianxing interrupted him with a smile. Don't be in a hurry to refuse. You won the title of young sword master and passed the first test of the swordsmanship-seeking steel. You've already joined the 9th generation sword master sequence. Sequence? Yiguchen sensed that things were not as simple as he thought. That's right, the 9th generation of the echelon. In the entire South Horizon region, in the endless lands of the various dynasties and hidden forces, the so-called geniuses are as numerous as carps crossing the river. As for swordsmanship geniuses, they are as numerous as the stars in the sky. Even 7th-ranked geniuses like you, though rare, are not rare. At the very least, there is no lack of 7th-grade heavens favorites and even 10th-grade heavens favorites in the other testing grounds left behind by our sect. 10th grade, Yiguchen was speechless. A 7th-grade heavens pride like him was hard to find in the Saint Origin dynasty, let alone a 10th-grade heavens pride. A 10th-grade prodigy was already considered a paragon among the prodigies. That was why they were called 10th-grade supreme prodigies. In the entire South Horizon region, it was hard to find more than 2 or 3 people like that. In the future, when they grew up, they would be peerless experts who could stir up a storm in the 9 zones. Thus, entering the 9th generation of the echelon does not mean that you have a master. Instead, it is a test and tempering. Once you enter the 9th generation of the echelon, there is no need for you to take me as your master. All you need to do is to defeat the successors of the other echelons and become the true 9th generation Sword Grandmaster. Then, you can accept the Sword Grandmaster's mandate of heaven, said Tianxing. Sword Sex Tianming? Yiguchen was puzzled. This is too far away for you, so let's not talk about it for now. You broke the sword-seeking steel and entered our sect's heavenly path sword realm. I didn't expect that you would be able to obtain 3,000 heaven-ripping sword souls. Yi Tianxing smiled faintly and shook his head. This green sword chi is called the heaven-ripping sword soul? Yi Guchen slowly raised his hand and a green sword chi spurted out. The heaven-ripping sword soul was condensed by our sect's heavenly path sword essence and the heavenly path sword chi above the 9 heavens. Now, you can only hold 3,000 sword souls. In this heavenly path sword realm, there are a total of 108,000 sword souls. Although I don't know how you managed to suppress 3,000 sword souls, your current strength is far from being able to control 3,000 sword souls. Hearing Yi Tianxing's words, Yi Guchen could not help but secretly nod his head. Although he used 3,000 heaven-ripping sword souls to open 360 sword veins in his body, that was all there was to it. With his current cultivation, it was already good enough that he could unleash over 100 heaven-ripping sword souls at the same time. The 108,000 heaven-ripping sword souls is our sect's unique skill. Although the sacred sword of heaven and earth that you used to comprehend the sword chi was left behind by our sect, it was a unique skill created by the 7th generation sword master, Yi Tianxing said faintly. The 7th generation sword master? Yi Guchen vaguely sensed that it seemed to be an extremely ancient inheritance. All in all, you don't have to think so much now. Becoming the 9th generation sword master and seizing the identity of the 9th generation sword master is absolutely harmless to people like you who pursue sword principle. Not only will you have the opportunity to learn the unique skills of the various generations of sword masters, but you will also have the opportunity to glimpse the shadow of the famed Archean swords. Yi Tianxing's words really made Yi Guchen's heart waver. As a sword fanatic, the unique skills of sword masters and the famed Archean swords were absolutely irresistible temptations. Yi Guchen really wanted to experience the earth-shattering power of the famed Archean swords that were ranked at the pinnacle of this world. I'm willing to become the 9th generation sword master. Yi Guchen's eyes were clear as he stood proudly. All right. Yi Tianxing suddenly pointed his finger, and a divine light landed on Yi Guchen. Yi Guchen's expression changed slightly. He raised his arm, and a green sword mark vaguely appeared on the back of his hand near his thumb. This is the emblem of the 9th generation sword master. It represents the qualification to compete for the title of the 9th generation sword master. If you meet the other 9th generation sword masters in the future, this emblem will sense it, Yi Tianxing said. Then how can I truly obtain the inheritance of the 9th generation sword master? Yi Guchen asked. It's very simple. You can become the 9th generation sword master by obtaining the emblems of all the other sword masters and obtaining the acknowledgement of the 1st generation sword master. There are 2 ways to obtain the emblems. One is to kill, and the other is to make the other sword masters submit and hand over their emblems willingly, Yi Tianxing said. Yi Guchen shook his head slightly when he heard this. It was not that simple. Not to mention the will of the 1st generation sword sect for now, just defeating or even killing all the other heirs of the sequence was an almost impossible task. Yi Tianxing had also said that there were even 10th grade supreme talents among the sword masters who had obtained the right to enter the sword masters. To put it bluntly, Yi Guchen's archenemy, Gu Xiaoyang of Starry Sword Pavilion, was probably inferior to those people. However, Yi Guchen was not afraid at all. Only such a challenge could gradually awaken the sword demon that had been dormant for a long time. Since you have become the 9th generation sword master, you can refine all the 108,000 heaven-splitting sword souls here if you have the ability. As for the other unique skills of the sword master, you will naturally obtain them in the future if you have the opportunity. The mission of the sword-seeking tablet is over, and my consciousness will also dissipate. Remember, even if you are just a sword master, do not bring shame to the name of the sword master. After finishing his last sentence, Yi Tianxing's consciousness turned into specks of light and dissipated. The sword master? Yi Guchen muttered to himself. He felt as if he had uncovered a corner of the mystery of the sword Tao in this world. It seems that there will be a lot of twists and turns in the future. However, this is what I want. Yi Guchen gently stroked the green sword-shaped emblem and smiled faintly. He was not afraid of the so-called 10th grade supreme talents. As long as he had enough time, the so-called supreme talents could be defeated with one sword strike. Chapter 72. In the Heavenly Path Sword realm, Yiguchen could be said to have gained a lot. He used the heaven-splitting sword soul to open up all 360 sword veins and also used it to cultivate the marrow-cleansing scripture, increasing the strength of his body again. The most important thing was that Yiguchen had obtained 3,000 heaven-splitting sword souls. Yiguchen had personally experienced the power of the heaven-splitting sword souls. Thousands of sword souls fell like a torrential downpour. Even if thousands of people besieged them, they were not afraid at all. Moreover, the heaven-splitting sword souls could enter a person's body and cause great damage. This could be said to be another trump card of Yiguchen's. However, with Yiguchen's current cultivation, not to mention the 108,000 sword souls, even the 3,000 sword souls in his body could not be fully mobilized. However, one could imagine that if Yiguchen mastered the 108,000 heaven-splitting sword souls in the future, the power would definitely be earth-shattering. After all, it was the unique skill of the sword faction. The only thing that Yiguchen felt a little pity was that he did not obtain the sacred sword of heaven and earth. Yiguchen, who had personally used that sword, naturally knew the terrifying power that could split the heavens and earth. Unfortunately, the sacred sword of heaven and earth was the unique skill of the 7th generation sword faction master. However, Yiguchen believed that if he could obtain the 108,000 heaven-splitting sword souls here, its power would not be weaker than the sacred sword of heaven and earth. After all, the 8th generation sword faction master, Yi Tianxing's attainment was not inferior to that of the 7th generation sword faction master. After this matter was settled, Yiguchen glanced at the sky. The heaven-splitting sword souls that had returned to silence once again turned into flowing clouds in the sky. Yiguchen's mind moved, and the sequence emblem on the back of his hand burned slightly. His body was wrapped in a ball of power and sent away from this place. On the sky sword peak, under the remains of the sword seeking steel, a divine light flashed and disappeared. Yiguchen's figure appeared. He looked around, and just when he thought that everyone had left, a snow-white figure appeared in his line of sight. Her figure was slender like a fairy, her ink-black hair was like satin that draped over her shoulders, and her jade-white face seemed as if it was carved out by the hands of the heavens. She usually carried an icy cold gaze, but at this moment, when she looked at Yiguchen, a trace of imperceptible joy actually appeared in her eyes. "It's him?" Yiguchen's expression did not change. Everything he encountered in the Heavenly Dao Sword realm was clearly a secret that could not be divulged. The current Yiguchen did not have the ability to challenge those mysterious and powerful 9th generation sequences. Sidu Hongxue walked over with light steps. Her eyes moved as she looked at Yiguchen. She was intelligent and didn't ask Yiguchen any unnecessary questions. Instead, she opened her mouth and said with a voice as delicate as jade, "The person who left a move on the sword testing stone was young Master Yi, right?" Yiguchen suddenly understood. After thinking for a moment, he understood and nodded slightly. "So it was you?" Hongxue has long heard of young Master Ye's reputation as the sword master. "I've long wanted to meet you in person, but..." Sidu Hongxue said and paused slightly. "But later, it was said that my sword vein was destroyed and my sword embryo was taken away, and I became a useless person, right?" Yiguchen did not mind and made it clear. Sidu Hongxue blushed a little. Obviously, she was right. So what if I'm a genius or a useless person? As long as I have a sword in my heart, I will always be Yiguchen of the Sword Master. Yiguchen put his hands behind his back and said casually and calmly. It was such a person who turned the moon-piercing sword art into something magical and practiced it to the realm of sword chi. It was such a person who cut off the arm of the infamous blood saber Mo Juechen with a stunning sword move. It was such a person who dared to destroy the sword-seeking steel and break the barrier that others did not dare to break. Situ Hongxue felt that Yiguchen was different from the young talents she had met in the past. Although there was still a trace of youthful arrogance in his eyes, there was more of a kind of understanding that saw through everything. It was hard to imagine that such a vision and temperament would appear in a 17-year-old youth. At this moment, Sidu Hongshue's heart was slightly at a loss. Then, she seemed to have thought of something and immediately said without hesitation, "Young Master Yi, can you teach Hongshue swordsmanship?" Yi Guchen frowned slightly, seeming to find it troublesome. Seeing Yi Guchen's expression, Sidu Hongshue could not help but puff her cheeks slightly. It should be known that a beauty like Situ Hongshue would usually break their heads to see her. If they could spend some time together, it would be like a gift from the heavens. But now, Sidu Hongshue took the initiative to ask, and Yi Guchen actually looked slightly annoyed. This was a treatment that Situ Hongshue had never experienced before. Even though she was usually as cold as a goddess, she couldn't help but doubt her own charm like a little girl at this moment. Yi Guchen looked at Sidu Hongshue, who was like a young girl in a fit of pique, and was slightly stunned. It had to be said that at this moment, Sidu Hongshue had an indescribable charm. She was like a goddess from the ninth heaven who had descended to the mortal world. With all the thoughts of a girl, she was shockingly beautiful and cute. But unfortunately, whether it was the sword demon in his previous life or Yi Guchen in this life, neither of them had any interest in women. Sword Dao was their only pursuit. However, Yi Guchen did not intend to refuse after thinking about it. He already felt that Situ Hongshue was extraordinarily intelligent. Otherwise, she would not have left behind some pointers on the sword testing stone. And practicing the way of the sword was not to be stubborn. It required communication and discussion. Although Sidu Hongshue's understanding of the way of the sword might be far inferior to Yi Guchen's, she definitely had some shining points that could give Yi Guchen some inspiration. Under Sidu Hongshue's slightly bitter gaze, Yi Guchen nodded slightly. In the next few days, Yi Guchen and Sidu Hongshue both trained in the great desolate forest. Swish! A wisp of sword light brushed past like a spring breeze, but it contained a fatal sharpness. A black water leopard suddenly became alert. Its figure flickered, and its hind leg was slashed by the sword light. Letting out a whimper, the black water leopard was like a streak of black light, wanting to flee to another place. Swish! A wisp of sword light was like lightning, directly striking the center of the black water leopard's head, and it was completely dead. In the dense forest, the two walked out. Yi Guchen glanced at the black water leopard lying on the ground and said, "The four-season swordsmanship is about comprehending the true essence of the four seasons. Spring, wind, and rain should be a killing move hidden under gentleness." The sharpness of your sword light was not well hidden, so the black water leopard was alerted. Otherwise, you could have killed it with one strike. Situ Hongshue nodded. Your sword is too slow. Your sword does not have a perfect fusion and transformation. Your sword moves should be as smooth as flowing water, without a trace of jerkiness. With Yi Guchen's repeated reminders, Sidu Hongshue's understanding of the way of the sword also gradually deepened. Finally, at a certain moment, facing a fire spirit python, Sidu Hongshue held Wang Ningmei in her hand and attacked. When the sword was unleashed, it actually turned into 4 sword shadows. One was like the spring wind and rain. One was like the blazing summer sun. One was like the autumn wind rustling. One was like the cold winter. It was the lesser ultimate move of the 4-season swordsmanship, the 4-season sword shadow. At this moment, Sidu Hongshue's spiritual level swordsmanship had also reached the initial success stage. The 4-season sword shadow instantly tore the fire spirit python's beast body apart. Situ Hongshue was in a daze, as if she still did not dare to believe it. The bottleneck of the initial success stage of the spiritual level swordsmanship was broken through just like that. Chapter 73. This was simply like a dream. One must know that the standard to measure a sword genius was to see if they had cultivated a spirit-grade sword technique to the initial stage. For example, Limitless Sword Sects Xian Hao, Sword Sects Talon Yen Wushuang, as well as the royal families Yuan Mie and other geniuses, they had all cultivated at least one spirit-grade sword technique to the initial stage. Only then would they have the strength to crush ordinary geniuses. And now, Sidu Hongshue had also reached this level. Perhaps she was temporarily unable to compare with Xian Hao and the others, But who could say for sure in the future? Especially with the guidance of a sword master like Yi Guqin. Even some of the sword cultivator seniors in the Situ family were far from Yi Guqin in terms of sword comprehension. Congratulations. Yi Guqin smiled faintly. Although it was him who helped Situ Hongxue to break through, he himself also had some gains in these few days of cultivation. Young Master Yi, thank you. Situ Hongxue looked at Yi Guqin with her beautiful eyes. He was like a riddle that Situ Hongxue was deeply immersed in, and she wanted to find out the hidden secret. When this thought appeared in her mind, Situ Hongxue moaned, and her charming face was dyed with a layer of faint crimson. Situ Hongxue, who was known as a genius, almost never revealed such an expression in front of the opposite sex. She couldn't help but bite her lips, not knowing what to do for a moment. Seeing the beauty's anxious expression, Yi Guqin also didn't know what was going on. He had never been close to a woman in his previous life, so he naturally didn't understand the countless twists and turns of a woman's mind. However, Situ Hongshue's rarely seen feminine side was something that only he had the fortune to see. Even when facing her fiancé, Murong Ditian, Situ Hongxue still maintained a cold and detached look. Both sides have gained something from the exchange of sword techniques. You don't have to thank me. Yi Guqin said faintly. Rumble. Yi Guqin was stunned when he heard the sound of hunger coming from his stomach. He looked at Situ Hongxue. Qi refining realm martial artists had yet to achieve inedia, so they naturally needed to eat. Situ Hongshue's delicate face instantly turned fiery red. She lowered her head slightly, like a little girl who had done something wrong. Yi Guqin laughed. He had always heard that Situ Hongxue was an icy beauty, but it was rare for her to reveal such a cute and naive look. Yi Guqin immediately began to prepare the corpse of the fire spirit python. Sword Demon, who had always lived in seclusion in the mountains, was naturally skilled in cooking game. Although there were no seasonings, the fire spirit python's flesh was like crystal jade under the roasting of the bonfire. It was glistening with oil and sizzling sounds, and it looked very tempting. Situ Hongxue, who was sitting obediently to the side, cautiously looked at Yi Guqin and then looked at the roasted python meat. Originally, Situ Hongxue wanted to prepare a meal to thank Yi Guqin. However, as the proud daughter of the Situ family, she had almost never done any chores except for cultivation. After roasting a piece of python meat, Situ Hongxue sat obediently to the side. It's ready to eat? Yi Guqin handed the roasted golden python meat to Situ Hongxue. Situ Hong's fingers were as white as snow, and her eating posture was also extremely graceful. However, after tasting the first mouthful of meat, her posture relaxed, and she continuously stuffed her captivating red little mouth with sparkling and translucent python meat. Yi Guqin casually ate and looked at Situ Hongxue, and for a moment he sighed in his heart. This sigh did not come from Situ Hongxue, but from Yi Guqin's discovery. Since his rebirth, it seemed that there was only cultivation, fighting, and killing. There were very few times like this, where he quietly sat, looked at the bonfire, and ate. It seemed that all along, Yi Guqin's heart had been stretched taut. Although there was nothing wrong with working hard to cultivate, blindly cultivating without adjusting one's state of mind would cause problems in the long run. For example, right now Yi Guqin and Situ Hongxue were sitting by the bonfire, casually eating. Yi Guqin felt that his heart was as calm as a lake. In his previous life, he had no one to accompany him, only the divine eagle. It was the same at that time, sitting on the peak of a mountain, lighting a bonfire, and eating roasted meat. Yi Guqin suddenly closed his eyes, and his thoughts drifted away. His past life and present life intertwined, and for a moment he sighed, as if he were in a dream. Suddenly, Situ Hongxue stopped eating, and her beautiful eyes turned to Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin was sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed, and a faint Taoist rhyme spread out. This Taoist rhyme was simple, plain, and natural. And in Yi Guqin's body, the 360 golden sword veins began to quietly circulate, and a mysterious force gradually gathered along the sword veins. If one could see through Yi Guqin's body, they would discover that the source of the 360 sword veins was Yi Guqin's heart. As the power gathered and circulated in the sword veins, it finally gathered at Yi Guqin's heart. At this moment, Yiguchen's heart seemed to be plated with a layer of golden powder, and it was shining brilliantly, overflowing with light and color. In the depths of his heart, the power of the sword veins gathered, and in the end, it turned into a golden seed. This golden seed was filled with dense sword-based Taoist rhyme, and it was quite mysterious. After an unknown period of time, Yiguchen suddenly opened his eyes, and his eyes were as bright as the sword radiance. At this moment, even with Yiguchen's calm temperament, he couldn't help but smile. He didn't expect Yiguchen's accidental comprehension to make a breakthrough in the great sword scripture. The golden seed in Yiguchen's heart was the sword heart seed recorded in the second volume of the great sword scripture. The first volume of the great sword scripture condensed the sword veins, and the second volume cultivated the sword heart. And the sword heart seed was the starting point for honing the sword heart. When the sword heart seed completely took root, sprouted, bloomed, and bore fruit, and merged with the heart, it meant that Yiguchen had completed the cultivation of the sword heart. However, at this moment, even though it was just the beginning of the sword heart seed, Yiguchen could feel that his understanding of the sword principle had taken a big step forward. With the help of the sword heart seed, Yiguchen could guarantee that any Xiantian sword principle would be cultivated to the great achievement, or even to the perfection level. It was even possible for him to reach the perfection level. Even if it was a spiritual level sword principle, with the help of the sword heart seed, Yiguchen's comprehension speed would be much faster than before. Any king-level cultivation skill had its outstanding points, and the second volume of the Great Sword Scripture was a king-level cultivation skill. This cultivation skill wasn't about attacking, but about comprehending swordsmanship. It brought Yiguchen a qualitative leap. It could be said that for some sword cultivators, the value of this king-level cultivation skill was comparable to that of a royal-level cultivation skill. Yiguchen was curious. To be able to inherit a cultivation skill like the Great Sword Scripture, how powerful was the force that Yiguchen and his father were in? However, this was not what Yiguchen needed to consider at the moment. Master Sidu Hongxue, who was standing aside, looked surprised. She could vaguely feel that Yiguchen was in an epiphany. After the epiphany, Yiguchen looked even more unfathomable. "It's nothing. I just had a small breakthrough." Yiguchen smiled faintly. "Is that so?" Situ Hongxue said. At the same time, she had mixed feelings about Yiguchen. She had always thought that she was a genius in sword principle. However, after meeting Yiguchen, she realized that there was always someone better than her. If he could have an epiphany just by eating barbecued meat, what else was impossible? Chapter 74. In the next few days, Yiguchen and Sidu Hongxue continued to train in the Great Wild Forest. After condensing the seed of the sword heart, Yiguchen's understanding of swordsmanship improved by leaps and bounds. Some of the previous obstacles were naturally cleared up. In just a few days, Yiguchen had truly cultivated the Aurora Quick Sword to the realm of great accomplishment. The Aurora Quick Sword was the swordsmanship that Yiguchen had been practicing since he was in the Xia family. Hence, after condensing the seed of the sword heart, the first swordsmanship to break through to the realm of great accomplishment was the Aurora Quick Sword. And after entering the realm of great accomplishment, Yiguchen also comprehended the ultimate move of the Aurora Quick Sword, the Daylight Break. The Aurora Quick Sword was known for its speed, and the ultimate move, the Daylight Break, was far superior to the ultimate move, the Aurora Pass, in terms of power and speed. As for the other swordsmanship, Yiguchen believed that he was not far from a breakthrough. Finally, after a few days, Yiguchen and Sidu Hongxue walked out of the Great Wild Forest. When they walked out of the Great Wild Forest, both of them were silent. Although the time spent together was short, to Sidu Hongxue, it was definitely an unforgettable memory. They practiced swordsmanship together, sharpened, barbecued, and rested together without any ill feelings. And Yiguchen's eyes were always deep and clear when he looked at her, unlike the other so-called God's favored sons who only coveted Sidu Hongxue's beauty. Even when she was with Yiguchen, Sidu Hongxue began to question her own charm. But no matter what, Sidu Hongxue knew that she was wavering. Perhaps it was not to the extent of being infatuated, but Situ Hongxue had to admit that Yi Guchen was indeed different from others in her heart. Her feelings toward Yi Guchen were also very complicated. She respected her master, admired him as a sword Dao grandmaster, and faintly felt an indescribable feeling. Especially when Yi Guchen was teaching her swordsmanship, his serious expression was very charming to Situ Hongxue. Yi Guchen was handsome to begin with, and the way he was immersed in swordsmanship only added to his charm. As a result, after leaving the great desolate forest, Situ Hongxue had always been in a state of absent-mindedness. Although the few days they spent together were wonderful, it was also short. "Young Master Yi, we're out," Situ Hongxue said. "Yes, but I've said it a few times already. Just call me Yi Guchen. Calling me young master is too awkward." Yi Guchen shook his head and smiled. Yi Guchen also admired this intelligent and beautiful girl who was quite talented in swordsmanship. "Yi Guchen?" Situ Hongshue's voice was as soft as a mosquito's. She turned her head, and her beautiful face was suddenly dyed with a touch of bright red. Yi Guchen faintly nodded, but his eyebrows were slightly raised. The Blood Tower's blood token in his origin ring had reacted, and must have sent a message over. "It's time to say goodbye." Yi Guchen sighed. "Are we about to leave?" Situ Hongxue raised her head, staring at Yi Guchen with her beautiful eyes, a myriad of thoughts running through her mind. In the end, the temporary beauty was like the moon in the water, unfathomable. "You're very talented in swordsmanship. If you persevere, you'll definitely be able to walk your own path of swordsmanship," Yi Guchen said. Situ Hongxue bit her cherry lips, and for some reason she suddenly said, "In a few days, I'll have a marriage alliance with Murong Ditian of the Murong family." Yi Guchen was stunned, and then fell silent. Looking at the silent Yi Guchen, Situ Hongxue couldn't help but clench her jade-like hands. Her marriage alliance with Murong Ditian didn't have the slightest bit of emotion in it, and was only an exchange of benefits between aristocratic families. Situ Hongxue thought that she didn't care who she was with, as long as it was for the good of her family. However, after meeting Yi Guchen, Situ Hongxue realized that it was very difficult for her to convince herself like this. As long as they met, it was fate and also a calamity. Yi Guchen remained silent, and Situ Hongxue smiled. Her heart had never been so tight before. "I understand. Thank you for the guidance you've given me these past few days." Situ Hongxue turned around, and her figure turned into a shadow, and she quickly floated away. However, when she turned around and left, there was a drop of sparkling and translucent tear. Only when Situ Hongshue's figure gradually faded away, did Yi Guchen let out a deep sigh. He opened his palms, and in his left hand was a hairpin, which he had forgotten to return to Situ Hongxue. In his right hand was the blood token of Blood Listening Tower, which had a message from the demon judge. The blood mission this time was to exterminate the Situ family on the day of the marriage alliance between the Situ and Murong families. Just as I expected. Are we going to annihilate the Situ family? Yi Guchen sighed. His identity was not only Yi Guchen of the Sword Sect, but also the Sword Demon of Blood Listening Tower. As an assassin of the Blood Lament Tower, he didn't have the right to question the mission. Since the mission was to annihilate the Situ clan, then as an assassin of the Blood Lament Tower, Yi Guchen definitely had to act against the Situ clan. Moreover, Yi Guchen concluded that as long as the mission was successful, he would definitely be qualified to enter the 18 blood prisons. Not only would he be able to stay in the first 8 prisons, but he would also be able to go to the bottom of the 18 blood prisons and have a chance to obtain the Shura Sword Essence. Even if it was for the Shura Sword Essence, Yi Guchen had to take action. Situ Hongxue, I hope we won't have to face each other, Yi Guchen thought to himself. His figure flashed, and he began to head to the rendezvous point set by the demon judge. However, Yi Guchen himself did not know what kind of storm his trip to the sword-seeking steel had caused. In an instant, the most popular name in the entire Beichen mansion was Yi Guchen of the Sword Sect. The former #1 genius of the Milky Way Prefecture, the holder of the title of Sword Sect, had once again shocked the world after a long silence. In the sword-seeking steel, he had furiously killed Zhao Fengyang, a disciple of the Heavenly Saber List from the Saber-conferred Royal Palace. With a sword that split the sky, he had severed the arm of blood saber Emojuechen, who was ranked 5th on the heavenly saber list. At the sword-seeking steel, he had comprehended the transformative sword art, and in addition to the small success spiritual sword art, he had destroyed the sword-seeking steel. With such talent and such a stance, he was like a rising sun that shook the world. In an instant, Yiguchen's reputation in the Beichen mansion had even surpassed that in the Milky Way prefecture. Everyone in the streets and alleys were talking about Yiguchen's deeds. Even the impending marriage between the two families seemed to have been diluted by Yiguchen's news. This news naturally did not only circulate in the Beichen mansion, but also in the neighboring manors, including the Milky Way prefecture. Milky Way prefecture, Xia clan's core area. The originally colorful garden, rockery, and lakeside was now frozen 3 feet deep, with frost and snow filling the sky. Amidst the flying snow, a blue-robed beauty with a head of dazzling ice-blue hair danced with her sword. Styx River sword art, Ice Phoenix break. With a shout from the girl, a terrifying frost chi comparable to the 8th cycle of the chi refining stage burst out from her body. Terrifying sword chi gushed out as frost and snow gathered together, seemingly forming an ice phoenix. The phoenix flew towards the frozen lake in front of her. Boom! An earth-shattering sound erupted, and the frozen lakeside shattered. Rocks and ice crystals burst out, and water splashed in all directions. This sword attack was enough to instantly kill an ordinary chi refinement master. Hee, Yubing's spirit grade sword art has finally reached the initial stage. A figure walked over with a smile. It was the Xia clan's patriarch, Xia Yuan. Father. Xia Yubing sheathed her sword. As expected of the Xia clan's phoenix. Your strength is enough to challenge the top 5 of the Heaven Pride ranking. Xia Yuan was greatly comforted. It's still not enough. Only by completely comprehending the ice sword will I be able to firmly sit at the top. Xia Yubing's voice was resolute. It's good to have confidence, but... Xia Yuan seemed to have thought of something, and a worried expression appeared on his face. Father, what are you worried about? Asked Xia Yubing. Xia Yuan sighed, and told Xia Yubing everything about the sword quest tablet in the Beichen mansion. Oh, Yiguchen has grown to such a level? Even Xia Yubing was a little surprised. She possessed the North River Sword King's complete inheritance, which was why she could grow at such an astonishing speed. But what did Yiguchen have? A cripple whose sword vein was destroyed, whose sword embryo was stolen, was actually able to cultivate to such a level. This made Xia Yubing faintly feel a sense of danger. Father, don't disturb me. I'm going into seclusion again. Xia Yubing regained her calm, her voice as cold as water. Xia Yuan sighed, nodded, and left. It's not enough, it's still not enough. The initial stage spirit grade sword art is not enough. With the ice sword I will definitely be able to improve the Styx River sword art. At that time, even Yiguchen will be swept away by my sword. A sharp light flashed in Xia Yubing's blue eyes. Chapter 75. Firmament City was an extremely prosperous city in the Beichen prefecture. It was also where the Situ family was located. The city was named after the current head of the Situ family, Sitalingshao. This showed the Situ family's status in Firmament City. It could be said that even the Beichen prefecture master could only be considered a guest in Firmament City. This was the foundation of a super family. It was far from what the 5 great families in the Milky Way prefecture could compare to. Recently, the flow of people in Firmament City had increased significantly. Forces from all over the Beichen prefecture had entered the city. Their goal was, without exception, to participate in the upcoming marriage between the 2 great families. As the 2 super families that had been rooted in the Beichen prefecture for nearly 1,000 years, their grievances were difficult to settle. There were battles and negotiations. In short, they had always maintained a balance. The Beichen prefecture master was happy to see the 2 families maintain a balance. The marriage was between the top geniuses of the 2 families. The significance of this marriage was even more obvious. Some people guessed that the 2 families were going to unite. In an extremely remote courtyard in Firmament City, Yiguchen, who was dressed in black and wearing a blood-red mask, had also arrived at the gathering place of the Bloodthirsty Tower's assassins. The red-haired ghost, Nightingale, and the other 50 iron-masked assassins had already gathered. As for the silver-masked assassins and gold-masked assassins, they did not show up. In front of the iron-masked assassins stood a tall figure hidden in a pitch-black cloak. It was the demon magistrate of the Bloodthirsty Tower. The target of this scarlet mission is the Situ family. All of you listen to my orders. The experts of the Situ family will be restrained by me. You will mainly deal with the young disciples of the Situ family and the Death Warriors, the demon magistrate said in a cold voice. Yes. The iron-masked assassins replied. Yiguchen was thinking about who had bribed the Bloodthirsty Tower to destroy the Situ family. Could it be the Murong family? But the Murong family is about to have a marriage with the Situ family. Why would they do such a thing? Otherwise, it could be the Beichen prefecture master who did not want to wait for the two families to unite and directly took action. Yiguchen pondered, but he did not have a clue. However, what Yiguchen could be sure of was that the Situ family definitely had a secret that made people have no choice but to take action. It was just that Yiguchen wasn't clear about the reason behind it. However, Yiguchen did not dwell on this matter. To him, it was fine as long as he could complete the mission. For some reason, the image of Situ Hongshue's beautiful face appeared in his mind again. Yiguchen sighed in his heart. After the demon judge pointed out the main points, many of the iron-masked assassins also dispersed. Before the red-haired ghost left, he gave Yiguchen a deep look. Yiguchen did not mind. As an assassin organization that hid in the shadows, Bloodthirst Tower had strict rules when carrying out their missions. If the red-haired ghost dared to cause trouble for Yiguchen during the mission, the consequences were not something he could bear. Sword Demon, please wait. Just as Yiguchen was about to leave, the demon judge suddenly spoke. Yiguchen's expression changed slightly under his mask. He said, "May I know what the demon judge wants? The blood mission this time is extremely important, but you've caused quite a stir." Yiguchen from the Sword Sect. The demon judge said deeply. Yiguchen was not surprised that his identity had been exposed. Assassins in Bloodthirst Tower might not know each other's identities, but those of a higher level, such as the 4 judges, the Tower Master, and so on, would definitely know the identities of the assassins below them. It was a spur of the moment, but I definitely did not reveal my identity as the Sword Demon. Yiguchen said casually. Although I don't know how you managed to catch the Tower Master's attention, I just hope you won't disappoint him. After the demon judge finished speaking, his figure flickered and vanished. Yiguchen's eyes flickered slightly. He was also a little curious about the Bloodthirst Tower Master who he had never met before. After all, he was an expert in the way of the sword who could fuse sword intent into his flute music. After a few days, Firmament City was completely bustling with noise and excitement. The streets and alleys were decorated with lanterns and colored banners, making the already bustling Firmament City even more festive. Tonight was the day of the marriage alliance between the Murong and Situ families. In the entire Beichen Manor, who knew how many young men and women were wringing their hands? The lovers of their dreams were about to get married, but they had to admit that Murong Ditian and Situ Hongxue were indeed the most compatible pair. As for whether they truly had feelings for each other, there was no need for outsiders to know. At this moment, in the central region of Firmament City, where the Situ family was located, there was already an endless stream of people and carriages. There was an endless stream of people coming to celebrate. In a pavilion of the Situ family, Situ Hongxue was wearing a red wedding dress, which fully outlined her curvaceous body. Her thin makeup was different from usual, and she gave off a delicate feeling. However, her gaze was slightly absent-minded, and it was unknown what she was thinking about. Big Sister Hongxue? Beside her, Situ Ling saw Situ Hongshue's state and said worriedly. She knew that not only did Situ Hongxue not have any feelings for Murong Ditian, she even faintly felt a trace of disgust. If it was before, Situ Hongxue could still conceal her disgust for Murong Ditian, then after the trip to the sword-seeking steel, Situ Hongxue could no longer conceal her disgust. As a woman, Situ Ling faintly knew that Situ Hongshue's change might be because of one person. The sword sex Yi Guchen. However, Sidaling was also helpless about this. Perhaps Yi Guchen's talent and strength were not inferior to Murong Ditian, but to the Sidu family, the marriage alliance with Murong Ditian would definitely benefit them the most. Hongxue, the marriage ceremony is about to begin. You should prepare. A middle-aged man's voice sounded from outside the room. It was the Situ family's patriarch, Sidaling Xiao. Yes, father. Sidu Hongshue's voice did not have any warmth. Outside the door, Sidaling Xiao sighed and said, "Sai, I have let you down. However, only by the marriage alliance between the two families can we completely stabilize the foundation of our Situ family." Hongxue understands. Sidu Hongshue's voice still did not have any warmth. At this moment, the Situ family's guest hall was already filled with distinguished guests, and there was a hubbub of voices. Reporting, North Star Mansion Master and Prince Yuanyi have arrived. A servant of the Situ family said loudly. Just as the voice sounded, two figures directly entered. One of them was wearing a brocade robe and had an imposing figure. It was the North Star Mansion Master. The other figure was wearing a golden robe. He had a handsome face and jade-like skin. It was obvious that he was a person who lived like a prince. However, the vigorous vital energy that was faintly concealed made it impossible for others to overlook his strength. It's the North Star Mansion Master. Prince Yuanyi has also come. It was no surprise that these people were so surprised because there were two outstanding heavenly prides in the Saint Origin dynasty's imperial family. One was Yuan Mie, who had profound attainments in sword Dao and had left his name on the sword-seeking tablet. The other was Prince Yuanyi. He was unique among the 12 princes of the Saint Origin dynasty and had obtained the title of Crown Prince. Although he was not ranked on the Saint Origin Heaven's Pride list, it was rumored that his strength was not much weaker than Yuan Mie's. Seeing that Prince Yuanyi had come to congratulate them, the surrounding guests were naturally surprised. Chapter 76. Prince Yuanyi's gaze was indifferent as he chatted with the North Star Mansion Master from time to time. The Mansion Masters of the Saint Origin dynasty were all appointed by the royal family. Therefore, the relationship between the North Star Mansion Master and Prince Yuanyi was naturally not shallow. However, when Prince Yuanyi looked around the Situ mansion that was decorated with lanterns and colored banners, there was a trace of inexplicable meaning in his eyes. Not long after, the people of the Murong family arrived. The person in the lead was wearing a red robe. He had a dignified appearance and an extraordinary temperament. It was Murong Ditian. Beside him was the Murong family's patriarch, Murong Fengyun, and many other elders. The crowd was densely packed. The surrounding guests were somewhat puzzled. Although they were here to pick up the bride, there were too many people. Almost 2/3 of the upper echelons of the Murong family were here. However, because today was a day of celebration, these people did not think too much about it. They only thought that the Murong family really attached great importance to this marriage. Outside the Situ mansion, Yi Guchen, who was wearing a black robe and whose face was covered with blood, was looking at everything with cold eyes. Perhaps because today was the day of the wedding, the people of the two families were gathered together. Therefore, the number of people patrolling outside the Situ mansion was reduced by a lot. Yi Guchen quietly waited for the demon magistrate's order. Finally, when Sidu Hongxue, who was wearing a wedding dress, appeared, all the guests sighed. She was indeed worthy of being one of the beauties of the Saint Origin dynasty. However, Sidu Hongshue's beautiful eyes were slightly absent-minded. She looked around the hall but did not see the figure in her heart. As for the illusion of snatching the bride, now that she thought about it, it was just a ridiculous delusion. Perhaps in his heart, I'm just a passerby that he met by chance. Sidu Hongshue's eyes had a trace of sadness. She admitted that her feelings for Yi Guchen had not reached the level of undying devotion. However, she had indeed left a shadow. And this shadow was obviously not something that could be erased so easily. Hongxue, this day has finally come. Murong Ditian smiled with a trace of complacency, like a hunter who had successfully caught his prey. To be able to make the famous beauty of the Saint Origin dynasty his exclusive property, that sense of superiority was indeed a kind of pleasure for a man. Looking at that invasive gaze, Situ Hongxue bit her lip. She was reminded of Yi Guchen's deep and clear eyes. The two of them were indeed not the same type of people. Brother Situ, today is the day of the marriage between our two families. Why don't we drink a few more cups? Murong Fengyun, the head of the Murong family, laughed loudly. Of course. Situ Lingxiao also smiled. At this point, the people in the hall were exchanging toasts. The people from the two great clans were eating and drinking together, and there was a sense of harmony. Crown Prince Yuani was the only one who barely touched the food and wine. He just looked at everything with a smile. After 3 rounds of wine, Murong Fengyun suddenly opened his mouth. Situ, the Murong family has already expressed our sincerity for the marriage between our families. Shouldn't the Situ family show your sincerity as well? Only then will our families be as strong as iron. Situ Lingxiao's heart skipped a beat. The smile on his face faded slightly as he said, I wonder what kind of sincerity Brother Murong wants? I heard that Brother Situ accidentally obtained 2 immemorial sword tokens in a place of opportunity in the Endless Plains? Murong Fengyun asked in an inexplicable tone. Situ Lingxiao's expression didn't change when he heard this, but his hands that were hidden in his sleeves suddenly clenched. Brother Murong, you must be joking. I don't know what the immemorial sword token is. Situ Lingxiao replied with a smile. Oh, is that so? Let me tell you the truth. My Murong family has 1 immemorial sword token and the Saint Origin Dynasty's imperial family has another one. They were both obtained from the infinite desolate plains. Murong Fengyun's tone turned cold when he saw Situ Lingxiao playing dumb. But I really don't know what the immemorial sword token is. Situ Lingxiao sighed. Big brother, don't hide it anymore. Aren't the 2 immemorial sword tokens in the family treasury? Suddenly, a person walked over. It was Situ Lingxiao's younger brother, Situ Jiang. Second brother, Situ Lingxiao's expression finally changed. Brother Situ, there's no need to hide it anymore. On the other side, the North Star Mansion's master suddenly stood up. There was a faint trace of disdain in his laughter. Situ Lingxiao's heart suddenly sank. He wasn't stupid. If he still couldn't sense the change in the situation, then he really didn't deserve the title of family head. Disciples of the Situ family, be alert. Before Situ Lingxiao could finish his words, Situ Jiang suddenly attacked and sent a palm strike at Situ Lingxiao. Situ Lingxiao had long been on guard against Situ Jiang. He turned around and sent a palm strike. But suddenly, Situ Lingxiao felt that the Zhen Qi in his body wasn't flowing smoothly. His limbs and bones felt like they were being pricked by needles. The wine is poisoned. Situ Lingxiao suddenly reacted. Rumble. When the 2 palms collided, Situ Lingxiao, whose cultivation base had reached the life and death chamber, was actually forced back. This palm strike caused the entire hall to turn deathly silent. Everyone was dumbfounded. This scene was too sudden. Many people simply couldn't react. Brother Situ, you won't cry until you see the coffin. Since you're so tactless, then we don't need to be polite with you. Murong Fengyun, the North Star Mansion's master, Prince Yuani, and the others all stood out and coldly looked at Situ Lingxiao. This scene also stunned Situ Hongxue. She turned to look at Murong Ditian. Murong Ditian seemed to have already known this. At this moment, his expression was calm. He looked at Situ Hongxue and said, Hongxue, don't worry. This matter has nothing to do with you. You won't be harmed in the slightest. What are you doing? Situ Hongxue was also extremely intelligent. After thinking for a bit, she understood. This was a trap that targeted the Situ family. Murong family, the North Star Mansion's master, and even the royal family represented by Prince Yuani had all joined hands to eliminate the Situ family. As for the reason, it must be the so-called immemorial sword token. An ordinary man's wealth was his own ruin. Even Situ Hongxue didn't understand what the immemorial sword token was. How could it bring such a disaster to the Situ family? Where are the Situ family's iron guards? Situ Lingxiao roared. The iron guards were trained by the Situ family. The lowest cultivation level was the Qi refinement realm. Previously, there were some iron guards stationed outside. Although there were fewer than usual, They were still used as a warning. However, at this moment, the iron guard stationed outside didn't respond. "Ha, little brother Situ, since you're so stubborn, then don't blame me." Murong Fengyun smashed his wine cup. In the darkness, figures swept past like the Grim Reaper. "It's the Bloodthirst Tower," someone among the guests shouted. "Leave no one alive." Prince Yuani shouted coldly. "Gather the iron guards, quick! Don't kill me. This has nothing to do with us. We're only here to participate in the banquet." In an instant, the entire brightly lit Situ family's residence turned into a blood-red azura field. Because the news had to be sealed, from the beginning, the Situ family and the guests of the banquet had to be killed. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.